来啦，坐。您的半拿铁，请慢用。
Caffè Breve, episode 169. Clapperboard. Let's begin. Hello, everyone. I'm Liu Fei.
I'm Xiaolei. It's not easy at all.
After we finish discussing Baidu, now it's time to talk about another company, Tencent. We'll generally follow the order of their founding dates. First, let's try a different approach. We won't do a speech with a Q&A session. I've noticed no one's really interested in a speech with a Q&A session. But I found another traditional way, an even more traditional way. How about a quick Q&A?
It's back. Are you trying to make things difficult for me? Isn't this just it?
I'm always putting you on the spot. You never guessed correctly with the speech with a Q&A session either. All right, what year was QQ born?
OICQ, let me think. 1999, I think.
You guessed right! It was 1999. What was QQ's name before? We just mentioned it. OICQ. I gave it away. What was Tencent's earliest successful game? You definitely know, QQ game platform. Before QQ dominated the market, its biggest enemy was 360.
IM's biggest enemy.
Right.
MSN Messenger.
The full name is MSN Messenger. QQ has always offered these paid services. Red Diamond, Green Diamond, Blue Diamond, Yellow Diamond, and all sorts of diamond VIPs. What kind of memberships do these different colored diamonds represent? You know, Green Diamond is a music membership. You know that because you've subscribed. What about Red Diamond, Blue Diamond, and Yellow Diamond? So, you don't even know these four simple ones? Red Diamond is QQ Show, Green Diamond is QQ Music, Blue Diamond is QQ Game Platform, and Yellow Diamond is QQ Zone. Also, QQ Zone's theme color is yellow, so that one's relatively easy to guess.
Back in the day.
Red Diamond is also a bit hard to guess, actually.
Back in my younger days, I did decorate my QQ Zone, but I decorated it for free. I thought of all sorts of ways to do it without paying.
Right. Next question. Pony Ma, he really copies everything. Which internet company's boss said this?
Then I can only guess 360.
Is 360 a boss? It's Zhou, right?
Yeah, right. You're asking which internet company's boss said that? The phrasing makes a difference.
The phrasing is different. Which internet company was I talking about? It's not important anymore. No. William Ding said it. William Ding was unhappy back then. The last question is actually a highly personal one. How long has it been since you last opened QQ?
Actually, I just opened it a couple of days ago, but it's only occasionally. It was to find an old friend who wasn't on WeChat but was on QQ. Right, we added each other on QQ back then. But before that, after I left my previous job, I stopped using it, because I had to use it every day for that job. But for pure communication needs, for someone my age, it's been many years.
Back then, when you used it at work, it was probably also for sending files.
It requires logging into email and various other accounts, right?
You see, this is also how I typically use QQ. I might use it once a month to log into the Tencent video platform. It's essentially become an account authenticator. Right. You're not really using QQ itself anymore. Okay, then let's get into today's topic. This episode will also be full of memories. Let's dive into Chapter 1, Ma's Early Struggles. Pony Ma was born on the 29th of October 1971, but he wasn't born in Shenzhen. Everyone thinks of him as a Shenzhen native, right? Actually, he was born in Hainan. Oh, he was born in Basuo Port, Dongfang City, Hainan Island, because his father was a local official at the port authority. Oh, but his ancestral home isn't Hainan either. According to his father, back then, they'd just write down their ancestral home directly. His father's ancestral home. Right. His father was already a Shenzhen resident, but his father's ancestral home was Chaoyang County, Guangdong Province, making him a Teochew person, so he lived with his father's family. His father registered Chaoyang County as their household registration location. Chaoyang County is currently in Shantou, so Pony Ma is Teochew. And in that year, Shenzhen didn't even exist yet. Because Xiaolei mentioned earlier that Baoan County only became the Shenzhen Special Economic Zone in 1979. When Pony Ma was little, he still remembered often encountering local ethnic minorities, the Miao people, in Hainan. They had tattoos on their faces and carried bamboo baskets. Hey, that was the living situation back then. Quite interesting. To be honest, his family's financial situation was quite good. His parents put a lot of effort into his hobbies. They subscribed to magazines for him, similar to We Love Science. In 4th grade, Pony Ma himself, based on an article in a magazine, bought a set of lenses, and assembled a telescope. That's when he started to love astronomy. It was purely handmade.
Purely handmade. That might not even count as an instruction manual.
Right? It wasn't like those pre-assembled toys you could just plug together as a kid. He bought individual parts and put them together himself. In his second year of junior high, Pony Ma went to Shenzhen Middle School. He was a late bloomer back then, only 1.41 meters tall, a perfect square root of 2, sitting in the front row. It was clear that Pony Ma's academic performance in junior high was outstanding. He was always in the top 3. At that time, the good students in his class, the ones who excelled academically, like Tony Zhang, Chen Yeshu, and Charles Chen, all studied Olympiad math. Only Pony Ma himself joined the astronomy interest group. He was particularly fond of astronomy and researching things about the universe. By high school, Pony Ma was still in the same class as these junior high classmates, Tony Zhang, Chen Yeshu, and Charles Chen. They were all good friends and they were in the same class again. What a coincidence. By then, Pony Ma had grown quite tall, taller than his friends. His friends even had a bit of a complaint, saying, "You used to sit in the front row, now how are you standing behind me?" They had a bit of an issue with that. In 1989, they took their Chinese college entrance examination. After graduating, they didn't really want to go north, so most of them applied to local schools. Why? There's a reason for this. Pony Ma later recalled that parents in Shenzhen at that time didn't really want their children to go north. Because if you went north, you'd lose your Shenzhen Special Economic Zone status. At that time, the Shenzhen Special Economic Zone was still a very important thing. Even today, of course, a Shenzhen is very valuable. But back then, they would think, oh, for the future, we're Shenzhen kids, and Shenzhen kids shouldn't leave. So at that time, many applied to local schools. In reality, Pony Ma didn't end up at Shenzhen University because his academic grades held him back. The reason many people associate him with Shenzhen University is that, relatively speaking, the institution isn't quite as renowned. It doesn't rank among the very top-tier universities. His scores were good enough to get into Tsinghua or Fudan. He was among the best students. But in the end, he went to Shenzhen University. Originally, he wanted to apply for the astronomy department at Shenzhen University, but he didn't. Why didn't he apply? Because there wasn't one. If there wasn't one, he couldn't apply, so he had no choice but to go into computer science. So he ended up in this field. Coincidentally, Tony Zhang, Chen Yeshu, and Charles Chen, who were all his classmates throughout middle and high school, all went to Shenzhen University for college. They were all at the same school. Even Chen Yeshu and Tony Zhang were in computer science. Only Charles Chen wasn't. Looking at their scores, Tony Zhang was first in computer science, and Pony Ma was third. They were all top students, the kind of model children everyone talks about. They all stayed there. Shenzhen University back then was basically surrounded by farmland, a very desolate place. If you go there today, it's completely different. The most prominent building you can see from Shenzhen University is the 39-story Tencent building right across the street. It's built directly opposite Shenzhen University, visible from the campus. Back then, they probably never imagined, while doing their morning exercises, that these few people would one day build that skyscraper, that their future would be right there, just by looking up. Pony Ma was also very smart. In the computer science department, he quickly got the hang of things and wrote many programs. After writing so many, he quickly moved to the next stage, which is easy to understand, the hacker stage. He wanted to show off his skills. He often locked the hard drives of the computers in the computer lab, and the administrators couldn't unlock them. Every time there was a problem in the computer lab, something wouldn't open, or something was wrong, the administrators would usually grab Pony Ma first and ask, "Was it you?" So, back then, he was basically the one who did this the most. Pony Ma also wrote a stock analysis software in his spare time because stock trading was becoming popular at that time. A company called Liming Network approached him, wanting to buy his software. Pony Ma said, "How about 50,000 yuan?" 50,000 yuan was an astronomical sum back then, and he was still being conservative. The other party immediately agreed. "Oh no, I asked for too little." At 22, Pony Ma sold the first software of his life, Xiaoyuzhou. Take a look at Pony Ma when he sold that software. Pony Ma, 22 years old, so young. And the computer he's holding? You can tell it's one of those ancient desktop PCs, probably one that only took floppy disks in the middle.
It feels like he wasn't wearing glasses back then. At least, given the clarity of this photo, you can't make out the outline of any glasses.
No glasses. After graduating from university in 1993, Pony Ma joined a company called Shenzhen China Motion Communications. This was because he had recently met a classmate who told him, "This company is hiring, you can give it a try." He tried, and they hired him. Since they wanted him, he went. That era, to be honest, was quite different from today. It wasn't like today's campus recruitment where you research many companies, get many offers, and then make a decision. At that time, Pony Ma actually considered starting his own business in Huaqiangbei, beginning with computer assembly, because he liked computers and wanted to be an individual entrepreneur. Huaqiangbei was the Zhongguancun of the South back then. Just like we talked about Zhongguancun before, many people started businesses in Huaqiangbei and made a lot of money. But Pony Ma researched it and found that, to be honest, this kind of work didn't have many barriers to entry. Many junior high school students from rural areas had competitive advantages over him in terms of enduring hardship. It's not that they couldn't endure hardship, but his own advantages weren't applicable because it was just about assembling machines or doing sales, and the ceiling was relatively low. China Motion, this company, was in the beat pager service business.
We've touched upon the beat pager service business a bit before.
Beat pagers. I guess younger friends have probably heard of them, but might not have seen a physical one. It was just a beat pager. Back then, for business people, having a black beat pager clipped to your waist was really prestigious and very expensive. Generally, the beat pager's activation fee was 100 yuan. A digital beat pager's annual service fee was 180 yuan. A Chinese character beat pager could cost up to 600 yuan a year. A Chinese character beat pager could display Chinese characters. Otherwise, it would just show numbers, just a single number. If you wanted to reply to that number, it was more expensive than today's mobile phone charges. Just imagine the value of the RMB back then, right?
It was a novelty, something only business people would have.
So, beat pagers were extremely profitable. That's why everyone was in the beat pager business. As we mentioned before, Xu Xinjiang and his team also started with the beat pager business and accumulated a lot of money. It was a special historical era. And don't underestimate China Motion. Although it's not very well known today. For example, I only know about it because Pony Ma worked there. Back then, everyone in the South knew about it. This company was the largest beat pager service provider in the South, listed in Hong Kong, with an annual turnover of 2 billion yuan and a gross profit of 30%. 2 billion back then.
2 billion back then, oh my goodness.
And back then, it was said to be the company with the best benefits in all of Shenzhen. People would say that getting a job there was like hitting the jackpot, an incredibly lucky break.
That's true. They must have been handing out cash all day long.
The company offered free lunch, which was quite rare in China at that time. Over 20,000 employees all enjoyed free meals, paid for by the company. When Pony Ma first joined, his monthly salary was 1,100 yuan. Due to his high skill level, it quickly rose to over 8,000 yuan. Even 1,100 yuan wasn't low back then. So over 8,000 yuan was a high-paying job. My goodness. But China Motion was incredibly impressive at the time. Despite Pony Ma earning over 8,000 yuan a month, his title was only supervisor, and there were several layers above him. Above supervisor was senior supervisor, then manager, then senior manager, then director, then department vice president, then deputy general manager, then general manager, and finally, an executive director. He was still many levels below the top leader. In a company of tens of thousands, he didn't have much of a presence back then. Many people who later knew Pony Ma as Little Ma only knew him as Little Ma within the company at that time.
Of course, looking back, for someone like Pony Ma, what he called finding a sense of presence, if he were a young person back then, he probably would have been content with that position.
That's about right. Pony Ma later recalled that he was a very introverted programmer at the time. He didn't like managing people, even though he was a supervisor. He didn't like giving interviews or dealing with others. Sitting alone at his computer was when he felt most comfortable. He was still just a programmer. The people around him, including his parents and himself, didn't believe he would start a company, let alone manage a large one, because he didn't look like an entrepreneur at all. He was a typical programmer, a typical Little Ma programmer. In his spare time, he developed a stock market data reception system. He had always been researching stocks. Could it make money? The reception system worked something like this. It used a pager to receive stock market data from radio waves. After receiving it, a single board computer would transcode the data and send it to a PC via a serial port. In that era, there were no SIM cards or wireless devices like we have today. So, by using a pager to receive signals, he could quickly get stock market data. He solved this problem purely through technical means and earned some money, probably tens of thousands of yuan, similar to what he made from his previous sale. After this business was done, Pony Ma paid attention to FidoNet, a very early old-school forum. Around 1995, Pony Ma himself opened a Shenzhen station called Pony Station. Pony is the English name Pony Ma still uses today, and in English it means a small horse. So, he was Little Ma. The users of FidoNet also called his Pony Station Ma Station. Ma Station, as we mentioned when discussing FidoNet, was the most luxurious station on FidoNet at the time. It had 4 phone lines and 8 computers. All of this cost him over 50,000 yuan, meaning he poured all the money he made from his stock market data system into it. Most people wouldn't make such a decision. This is my hobby, I love it so much, I'm willing to spend this much money on it. But Pony Ma was exactly like that. That 50,000 yuan was even obtained with connections that got him half price for extra lines, allowing the entire station to be built. At that time, Pony Ma was quite well known on FidoNet. He wrote a famous article titled BBS and FidoNet, which was published in the Computer World newspaper. We've also discussed how Bo Junqiu, Jun Lei, and William Ding were all station masters. Like many early computer enthusiasts, Pony Ma spent a lot of time on forums, downloading and studying software. Back then, there was no concept of a product manager title in the internet industry. Product design and user experience weren't defined concepts. He would just download software, identify problems, and assess whether the design was good. He often communicated suggestions to others. For example, he gave suggestions for a software called Foxmail. In 1997, Pony Ma met Alan Zhang. At that time, Alan Zhang was much more famous than Pony Ma, being a very well-known programmer in the industry. Pony Ma was still just the station master of a Ma station in Shenzhen. In April 1995, Pony Ma met William Ding, the FidoNet Ningbo station master. We also mentioned this in the episode about William Ding. William Ding's NetEase, Shuxin Zhang's Yin Highway, Charles Zhang's Sohu, and Jidong Wang's Stone Cube all emerged between 1995 and 1996. So, William Ding was already thriving in Guangzhou at that time, and Pony Ma couldn't sit still. We were all webmasters, understood software, and had development capabilities. If he could succeed, so could I. So, he approached his good friend, Tony Zhang, whose technical skills were even more impressive than his own, to discuss starting a business. Where was Tony Zhang at this point? After graduation, he didn't work, but went on to pursue a master's degree at South China University of Technology, the best university in the South for his major. Afterward, he joined Liming Network Company, the same tech company that had previously bought Pony Ma's system and specialized in pagers. That's where he reconnected with Pony Ma. Apparently, back then, classmates didn't have many good ways to communicate, so they often lost touch after graduation. Their reconnection reportedly happened this way. Tony Zhang, while at Liming Company, discovered a hacker intrusion on their server. He traced the IP address and found it belonged to China Motion. He immediately thought, "Aha, it's you." He called Pony Ma, who said, "I was just testing you to see if you could find me." The two then got together and decided they could indeed discuss starting a business. They also brought in another classmate, Chen Yeshu, completing the trio of old friends. Chen Yeshu was very important because while Pony Ma and Tony Zhang were technically skilled, Chen Yeshu worked at the Telecom Data Communication Bureau. As we mentioned when discussing William Ding, he needed good connections with the Telecom Bureau in Guangzhou and the support of its leaders to get projects. So, Chen Yeshu had resources and was brought in to work part-time. At the same time, they also brought in Charles Chen, another old classmate, making him the 4th member. Charles Chen worked at the Entry-Exit Inspection and Quarantine Bureau, a rather unique department. But Charles Chen's involvement meant he could help them with administrative tasks because he was such a good person. He was particularly good at acting as a lubricant to mediate conflicts among them. At that time, Charles Chen was actually already married, one of the earliest among them to tie the knot. Normally, he shouldn't have taken such a risk, but his wife proactively said, "It's okay, I still have my job. If your startup fails, it's fine, I'll support you." Charles Chen was very touched by this and joined them. The 4 of them gathered, and while eating skewers, they discussed what to do. They were all good students, so they thought, let's start a tutoring center, a grad school prep class. They realized they were missing someone good at sales. So they searched and searched, but couldn't find any of their classmates. Instead, they found a person named Liqing Zheng. He was the only one in their eventual 5-person team who wasn't their classmate. He graduated from Sidian University with a major in communications. After graduation, he was transferred to this position, and the reason they knew him was by chance. He worked at the Telecom Data Communication Bureau, and specifically, he was in sales there. He once single-handedly convinced a Shenzhen real estate developer to invest over 1.2 million yuan to build China's first broadband community. Liking Zhang was the one who made that happen. So, the director highly valued him. He had a very strong ability to tackle tough problems. Pony Ma also knew the leaders at the Telecom Bureau. Liqing Zhang was introduced by the director of the Shenzhen Data Communication Bureau. You see, the director had such a good relationship with Pony Ma that he recommended his excellent sales subordinate. Finally, the five of them came together and decided to collaborate. Pony Ma was responsible for strategy and product, Tony Zhang for technology, and Liqing Zhang for marketing. These three were full-time, while Xiaoyuzhou and Charles Chen were part-time, working after their regular jobs. As for the shares, Pony Ma had the highest at 47.5%, Tony Zhang 20%, Liqing Zhang 12.5%, and Xiaoyuzhou and Charles Chen each had 10%. Hey, Xiaolei, take a look at them shortly after they started their business.
Oh my, was this photo really taken back then?
It must have been some time after they started the business. This photo wasn't taken at the very beginning.
Charles Chen looks like Huang Zheng, haha. How should I put it? My feeling is that this photo, although still showing them young, especially the others whose faces we might not recognize, Pony Ma looks even younger than in the previous photo. But this photo doesn't have as strong a sense of age. I suspect it might have been slightly retouched later. And you said they were classmates, but Tony Zhang is standing next to Pony Ma, and it feels like there's a 10-year age difference between them.
How should I put it about these people? Pony Ma certainly looked very young among them. He had a very youthful spirit. Then there was Liqing Zhang, who was big and burly. Before, when Liqing Zhang and Pony Ma often went out to discuss business, everyone assumed Pony Ma was Liqing Zhang's junior or their secretary. Liqing Zhang always had to introduce him, saying, "This is my boss, this is my boss." Tony Zhang, on the other hand, looked very much like a tech boss. He had a general appearance that was, how should I say, like a boss, like a technical expert. Okay, let's continue. Initially, the company was actually founded very casually. The chairman wasn't Pony Ma, it was Pony Ma's mother. Oh, because they hadn't resigned from their jobs yet. So, they just put down his mother's name. His mother was retired at the time, so she was at home, and they made her the chairman. It was easier to handle, and she helped them register the name. Next, they had to think of a name. It definitely had to be something Sun, because they were going into communications. They were all in the communications industry. Calling it something Sun was in line with the popular practice at the time. But what ex-Sun? They came up with several names and had Pony Ma's father, with the whole family's encouragement, go to the Industrial and Commercial Bureau to register them. The order of registration was Wang Sun, Jiek Sun, Fake Sun, and Tencent. As it turned out, Wang Sun, Jiek Sun, and Fake Sun couldn't be registered. Then his father said, "How about we just register as Tencent?" Pony Ma replied, "That's not good. It makes me seem self-centered." It's like, right? My ego is huge. But in the end, his dad said, "No, you can't do that. Let's think of another name. How long will this drag on?" So, they made a decisive choice then and there, and it was finally registered as Tencent. The English name was also there from the beginning, Tencent. Tencent has never changed, which is very interesting. Tencent is a perfectly symmetrical name. Think about it. Tencent. It's completely axially symmetrical. Also, Tencent means 10 cents. It represents the future like 1 dime. Our Tencent is about accumulating small gains to make a fortune. And if you think about it today, that's exactly how they made their money. Small amounts, one by one, accumulating to become one of China's largest commercial companies. After the name was set, they found a building in Huaqiangbei, rented an office, and got started. Actually, the company's journey, from registration to getting the word out, began in early 1998. But they officially opened, so to speak, on a special date, the 11th of November 1998. This date was their birth date, firmly set. Even now, Tencent generally considers November 11th as its founding day. Double 11, Singles Day. Back then, it was still Singles Day. Later, because of Alibaba, Singles Day disappeared, and Tencent's birthday also disappeared. Now there's only the Double 11 e-commerce festival. Early Tencent wasn't as famous as other companies. Although the business seemed pretty good, What I initially did was a beep pager business combined with the internet. I never quite understood what internet beep pager meant. I looked it up, and it's roughly like this. If I wanted to page you, I'd have to make a phone call, right? Sometimes I'd even have to make a long-distance call, and long-distance calls were really expensive back then. Today, we say there's no concept of roaming anymore, so long-distance calls don't really have that concept either. They're just cheap now. But back then, long-distance calls were very expensive. Sometimes, if you wanted to page a station, you might have to call an out-of-province station, and that would cost a lot of money. But the internet could solve this problem. For example, you could send the content via email to some site, and that site would help you make the page call. Wouldn't that be cheaper? So that's what Internet Beat Pager was. For example,
It could be cheaper locally, and they could still make a profit from the price difference.
you only paid for internet access, no other fees. For Internet Beat Pager, you just paid the internet fee. By opening a web page or sending an email, you could use that content to page someone. As Ponyma developed this Internet Beat Pager business, he started thinking, well, if sending is done via the internet, can receiving also be done via the internet? Wouldn't that just become internet communication?
It was entirely online, eliminating the intermediaries. What was originally just a workaround became the method itself.
After thinking about it, yes. Didn't this just become a virtual beat pager service? On both ends, it still used some beat pager strategies or methods, but both sides were virtual beat pagers. You'd set up a virtual account, a virtual beat pager. When you sent a message, you'd use a beat pager account number, but this account wouldn't send it to a physical beat pager in someone's hand. Instead, it would go to a virtual address, and I could convert that address into something that could be opened on a computer. This was the earliest communication software, but it was also too early. In that era, let alone mobile phones, even computers weren't widespread. So people didn't find making a phone call particularly troublesome. On the contrary, going online or sending emails back then was a high threshold activity. The hardware simply wasn't sufficient. So, that era was still dominated by the beat pager market. But they didn't operate in the beat pager market for long, because the beat pager market itself didn't last long. Look at the timeline. By the late 90s, mobile phones quickly emerged. Brick phones, Motorola, Nokia, they entered China, and their era had arrived. Ponyma's first major beat pager order came from Hebei Telecom. That's why Ponyma later went to Xiaoyuzhou. I remember once, during a speech, he mentioned that Tencent's very first deal originated in Xiaoyuzhou. At that time, Hebei Telecom spent over 200,000 yuan to buy a beat pager system, which they customized for them. It was essentially a pure B2B business because they had software development capabilities. But after selling that 200,000 yuan system, they initially wanted to follow William Ding's path. William Ding, back then, made his fortune by selling email systems, also a B2B business, to telecom bureaus. Ponyma also wanted to sell his systems this way, but he found he couldn't sell them. Why? Only Hebei Telecom was buying, others didn't really need them because the beat pager market was declining. Plus, many telecom bureaus probably already had their own systems. So, they had no choice but to lower the price. They dropped it to 100,000 yuan, no buyers. Down to 50,000, still no buyers. Down to 30,000 and still no one bought it. They were on the verge of collapse. At that point, they had to take any job that came their way, any paying job. Some were even just a few thousand yuan. Many jobs, including various things completely unrelated to beat pagers or communication, or perhaps slightly related to communication, like email systems. William Ding sold email systems back then, and they sold them too. Li Qingzheng tried to leverage connections, finding out who knew whom at the telecom bureaus, and if they needed something done for a few tens of thousands of yuan. So, by the end of 1999, about a year after they started, Tencent had 1 million yuan in revenue. But while 1 million yuan sounds like a lot, it wasn't net profit. The costs were already unsustainable. They were still operating at a loss. At this point, the opportunity we all know about arrived. And that, of course, was QQ, which was called OICQ back then. Why OICQ? Because the original was called ICQ. Abroad, ICQ was an Israeli internet software. What did ICQ mean? ICQ. It very simply represented the product's function. You could communicate online, send files, and see online status. The earliest reason for ICQ's appearance was that they wanted to create something that could send and receive messages using the internet, mimicking SMS messaging, though it wasn't compatible with SMS. Of course. In late '98, ICQ was acquired by AOL for 400 million. It exploded globally at the time because ICQ wasn't making any money. How many users did it have? Just over 10 million. It had just surpassed 10 million users and sold for $400 million. That was the peak of the dot-com bubble, and AOL had money. The whole world was shocked, and everyone started paying attention. OICQ wasn't even the earliest Chinese tribute software to ICQ. The first appeared in '97, called CICQ from Taiwan. Later, it entered mainland China and was renamed PICQ. Nanjing also saw a product called NetGenie. These were basically all ICQ clones. By August '98, Guangzhou Telecom put out a tender, saying they wanted to develop an ICQ-like software and invited bids. Ponyma said, "I want to go." "We'll go too." But after looking into it, Li Qingzhang said, "It's actually rigged." There was a company called Feihua that had already completed the product, called PCICQ. PCICQ was also an ICQ clone and was already finished. The key was that Feihua, as we mentioned, was a wholly owned state-owned enterprise of Guangzhou Telecom. A state-owned enterprise had already developed its own product, and its own unit was bidding. How could it not win? It was just a formality. And indeed, they lost the bid. After losing, the few of them discussed it. How about we just build it ourselves anyway? If we build it, at least we can nurture it first and see what happens, right?
We could still use it next time there's a bidding opportunity.
Or rather, this software of ours is quite interesting. It's like when ICQ was acquired, that really blew up. So we thought, let's nurture this, and maybe when it grows big, we can sell it too. Ponyma was optimistic about this, so he named it OICQ. Why OICQ? Because the O stands for open. That's the official explanation. During development, they still made some innovations for localization. You might think, it's just chat, file transfer, and a contact list. Online users show as online, offline users show as offline. Pretty simple. But for an ordinary person, you wouldn't understand the depth of the intricacies involved. Once in a meeting, Ponyma asked, "Where do you think users will go online?" This question seemed simple, even a bit silly. Where would they go online? On computers, obviously. Back then, there were no mobile phones. But would it be home computers or computers elsewhere? Internet cafes. In 1999, very few people had home computers, so internet cafes were the primary place for everyone to go online. Chinese people went online at internet cafes. Yes. And if they're at internet cafes, then we need to consider a problem. Why was it a problem? Because ICQ didn't save user lists or chat history, it only stored them locally. Once you finished using it locally and switched to another computer, everything was gone. You'd even have to write down the other person's number in a notebook to send them messages or whatever. For many Chinese users, I'd go to an internet cafe, and every time I'd lose everything. Not just my user list, but even my chat history was gone. This was unbearable. So, Tencent very early on implemented the function of online storage for user lists and chat history. This is actually how we got the concept of friends that we're familiar with today. You save your friends' information to your own account. Before that, nothing was saved. How to describe ICQ? You can simply understand it as a network phone. Every time you had to dial it, you could only chat with friends who were online. If they weren't online, you'd dial them and they wouldn't receive messages. There were no offline messages back then. Nothing. It was essentially just network communication. When you put it that way, it's very clear. So, this kind of iteration brought immense value to everyone. OICQ could send messages, and the recipient could receive them even if they were offline. They'd get it as soon as they opened the app. It was less like a network phone and more like an email box. You'll find it was very similar to early email, just a simpler email box. Technologically, it also compressed the software size, improved chat stability and efficiency, and offered personalized avatars. These might seem like small features, but combined, they made it really fun. Everyone loved using it. OICQ's notification sound directly adopted the sound of a beep pager, that beep 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 sound everyone was familiar with. Today, of course, the name beep pager and its functional design were also relatively easier for people in that market to understand. It was a messaging product software. The beep pager's functional design was easy to grasp. Where did the name come from? Back then, OICQ was called Network Beep Pager in Chinese. Yes, it used many such methods, essentially like a subtitle. It used various forms to quickly help people understand what this thing was and what it did. Otherwise, if you just said, "I'm an instant messaging software," who would know what that meant? But if you said, "I'm an online beep pager," everyone immediately understood. After the software was developed, they needed infrastructure support, like bandwidth and servers. Li Qingzheng came through again. He persuaded Shenzhen Telecom to invest over 600,000 yuan to provide servers and bandwidth. Everyone collaborated on the project, and on the 10th of February 1999, The first version of OICQ was released.
That easily? I was just thinking.
Exactly.
What about the servers? How would they manage? If he wanted to do this, who would provide them?
They still had to pull strings similar to William Ding's approach back then. They didn't have money themselves. How big was the first version of OICQ back then? 220K. Unimaginably small. How did they achieve that? Today, a single image is more than 10 times that size. After the first version of OICQ was released, it was, you could say, like water in a cup, completely still, making no waves at all.
It didn't even make a ripple in anyone's cup.
In the early days, when there were few users, what could they do? Everyone had to come up with ideas. It's said that Pony Ma and a few partners pretended to be girls and chatted with men. Liu Wei has mentioned this anecdote several times. Who would have thought that the first man pretending to be female online in the history of Chinese internet communication tools were actually Pony Ma and his partners? And it was indeed one of the earliest communication tools. Additionally, Pony Ma led a team to post on university BBS forums to attract users. He also did offline promotions at schools because university students are more open to new things and also have more free time. You know, working professionals might be too busy and unwilling to spend time on this. So, university students became their first user base, which is a common pattern for many internet products in their initial launch phase. Gradually, OICQ's user base grew, and people found it very interesting. The first batch of OICQ users were actually old users of PCICQ, which was developed in Guangzhou next door. Why? Firstly, these old users had established habits. They knew what this kind of thing was and could easily get started. Secondly, why did they switch? Because PCICQ wasn't well made, its technology was unstable. You might wonder how a communication tool could be technically unstable. Well, messages often failed to send, and packets were lost. And just staying connected was a huge challenge for them. You'd be online, click to send, and it wouldn't go through.
I have some recollection of this. Back when I was in school, we couldn't write anything else, like sockets or similar stuff. Between dorms, we computer science students would constantly debug, which was a hassle. We basically ran into these exact problems.
Right. You have to consider all sorts of miscellaneous issues from the real physical world with different users in different scenarios. So, Tencent put a lot of effort into optimizing this, at least to ensure it wouldn't disconnect and messages could be sent. That was a huge achievement at the time. 2 months later, OICQ's concurrent online users exceeded 500. Of course, 500 people might seem insignificant today, but back then they were incredibly excited. It was remarkable.
And those few men pretending to be female online managed to attract 500 people.
Back then, Pony Ma and his team specifically bought beer, and everyone gathered to celebrate and toast. The numbers that followed were far more significant than just 3 digits. The biggest download site back then was called Huajun Software Garden. Some of you might remember it.
Absolutely.
Huajun, the founder of Huajun Software, recalled. Yes, the founder's name is Huajun, and he was the software developer himself.
Oh, I see. I thought it had something to do with Zhonghua or something, right?
His name is Huajun. Huajun recalled that OICQ quickly became the most downloaded software that year. By the end of 1999, it had 1 million registrations, which happened very quickly in just a few months. OICQ back then was really different from what people might imagine. Its dialog box actually looked a lot like an email composition window today. Xiaolei, take a look.
The simplest Win95 interface. Very plain, a dialog box without even a single image.
Its interface basically adopted the common interactions found in Windows dialog boxes at the time. It didn't design any new user interface of its own. This included selecting service providers, choosing number types, and filling in information, all done using existing components.
If you look at this interface, it didn't even have a chat list. Messages were sent one by one. You type a message, hit send, and that was it.
That's why earlier I said it was very much like email.
After you clicked in that dialog box, it might just disappear. The message was sent. Then you'd wait for a message to come back, and you'd see it. It really was an email-like interaction experience.
Exactly. It was the most primitive way to send messages, more like a beep pager. That's easy to understand.
Right? They were essentially building this based on their understanding of beep pagers.
Yes. It wasn't just beep pagers. It was also very similar to text messages of that time. Today, we have these so-called bubble interfaces, where messages appear in bubbles, much like WeChat. That kind of SMS interface didn't exist back then. This chat-like SMS interface only appeared many years later. Back then, a text message was just one sent and one received. There was no sense of a conversation between messages.
It was non-smartphones. If everyone thinks back, that era of the earliest non-smartphones was fundamentally different from today.
Yes, in that era, many things they developed were indeed done by an amateurish organization with a feeling of learning from scratch. There's an interesting story that circulated about early Tencent. For a year after OICQ launched, all communication was completely unencrypted. This means that for user chats, you didn't even need to be a hacker. As Xiaolei mentioned earlier, if you studied computer science, you could just capture a packet and directly access all user data and chat content. Pony Ma later realized this isn't right. This feels really off. Something's definitely not right.
They finally realized this problem.
After discovering the problem, he found a programmer named Ye Huang. He told him, Xiao Huang, research how to encrypt this. 2 weeks later, Pony Ma went to find Ye Huang to discuss the progress of the encryption. He found that Xiao Huang wasn't at his desk. On the table was a book titled Principles of Cryptography, lying face down. Pony Ma thought, let me see how far he's gotten. He flipped it open and saw, page 1, chapter 1, section 1. What is encryption? He was shocked. What's going on with the progress? This is a little anecdote that circulated from the early days. Anyway, through this kind of trial and error, they slowly learned and built things up. In 1999, everyone also started discussing the icon issue. The original icon wasn't a penguin, it was a beep pager. They thought, this isn't really working. We can't just have a beep pager here. Let's design something else. An animal. Initially, they thought of a pigeon, like a carrier pigeon delivering messages, similar to how many later IM tools also used pigeons. Yes, later they also thought of a penguin. Many people felt the penguin seemed cuter compared to the pigeon, but one person strongly opposed the penguin, and that was Pony Ma. He really disliked it. The beep pager is still better. He had a strong attachment to beep pagers being from the beep pager industry. He said, I still think the beep pager is better. The penguin doesn't really relate. The beep pager might be more task-oriented. So, he finally said, all right, let's put both icons up and let users vote. This was their earliest A/B testing, directly asking users which icon looked better. In the first round, Pony Ma won. Users thought the beep pager looked better. Why did we do a second round? Then the designers looked into it and said, our drawing wasn't good. We need to redraw it, it didn't look appealing. So they revised it several times and eventually, the penguin's votes really started to climb. They accepted the results and finally went with the penguin. However, the earliest penguin icon was very different from today's.
Let's take a look.
You probably don't remember it at all.
If you put it that way, I probably don't remember it. Oh my goodness, I remember it now, I really do.
The penguin looked...
It was very realistic, much more so than today's. That's how I'd put it.
Xiaolei said realistic, but not in the sense of a lifelike image. It was still a cartoon sketch, just taller and a bit thinner. That was the main difference.
It looked more like a penguin.
So, how did the chubby penguin we're familiar with today come about? In October 1999, Shenzhen hosted the first China International High-Tech Achievements Fair. Tencent rented a booth, a counter, to exhibit there. Charles Chen then commissioned someone to make 1,000 ceramic piggy banks. The factory that was processing them gave feedback, saying, yours is too tall. It's too tall. It's prone to falling over. It can't stand stably. We have our own design. You could use our design, and I even added a scarf for it. That penguin isn't cute either, but I added a scarf for it. Take a look. Charles Chen looked at it and thought, okay, fine. He agreed. Your factory just went ahead and changed it. And in the end, it actually became very popular. Originally, these 1,000 ceramic piggy banks were meant to be given away for free. But too many people came to ask for them. You can't just let them all be snatched up, right? So they started charging, setting a threshold. They charged 5 yuan, and people were still scrambling for them. Then 10 yuan, and they still sold out. After thinking about it, this chubby penguin is so popular, let's just change it like this. So they directly used the factory's design. You see, it's quite a coincidence. A small boat turns easily, meaning they were flexible. It's very interesting. The designer at the time also expressed confusion, saying, penguins originally live in the Antarctic. Why would they wear a scarf? They're already resistant to cold.
Here's a little known fact. Most penguins in the world don't actually live in the Antarctic. Many penguins can live in tropical regions.
But Li Qingzheng said, look, that's a great question. Everyone who sees the penguin has to ask, why is it wearing a neck warmer? Why is it wearing a scarf? Doesn't that make it memorable? It sparks conversation, and that's good enough for the designer. Anyway, the boss said it, so whatever he says goes. This is also a pretty fun anecdote. and it has its own logic, and it makes sense. Initially, the scarf on the penguin's neck wasn't even red. It slowly became red later for aesthetic reasons. It also turned red. By this point, it had become the more familiar image we know today. Later, Tencent even sold the rights to develop extended merchandise to a chain store. This chain store specialized in selling penguin-related merchandise and once had over 200 branches in Shenzhen and Guangdong. However, it never grew larger or stronger. Back then, Pony Ma took it very seriously. He even believed this penguin could become a national IP in China just like Hello Kitty. A lot of effort was put into promoting it at the time. Although it didn't take off later, it also shows how incredibly popular this IP was back then. Everyone genuinely loved it. One more piece of information. Haven't I mentioned that Hello Kitty itself has no story? No story at all. But when OICQ became popular, Pony Ma was already considering selling it. At that time, Tencent was struggling a bit, just like the year before. This year wasn't going well either. It was already a case of a small house about to collapse. The company had already invested over 1 million, and the savings of the founders were basically depleted. All the money from their families and their own savings were gone. Pony Ma thought, let's sell it. If we sell it and make a little profit, it'll count as a successful startup. He wanted to recoup his investment. How about selling it for 3 million? Li Qingzheng took this price and went around trying to sell it through his connections. No one bought it. It was very difficult. At the time, they rented an office in a building owned by SEG Group. The manager of SEG Group even talked with them. The SEG Group manager later recalled, I didn't understand it. I didn't understand their software. Even if you said it had 1 million users back then, it looked like a public welfare project. Everyone used this thing for free to send messages back and forth. How much money did pager companies make? You weren't making a dime. Why would I buy this? To keep losing money? There was no business model. They recommended it to many pager companies or telecom-related companies, but many truly found it baffling. 3 million? I wouldn't even buy it for 30,000. That's ridiculous. At that time, some companies did seriously engage with them, saying, we have our own valuation methods. You can sell it for 600,000, but 3 million is too much. Oh, why 600,000? How did you calculate that? They had calculated the second-hand value of the computer desks and chairs. Basically, if we take over your company, the 600,000 would cover.
It was calculated based on net assets.
Yes, purely based on net assets. Pony Ma was furious at the time. It was so frustrating. He didn't think 3 million was a particularly expensive price. But if he really sold it for 600,000, then the startup would truly be a huge loss. He thought, I'll just keep it myself. And some of the money invested earlier was borrowed from friends. At that time, Pony Ma even tried to ask his friends, can we convert debt to equity? After all, he couldn't pay them back for the time being. All his friends, all those who lent him money, politely refused. One friend even said, Pony Ma, this money hurts me. Southern friends shouldn't say hurts, they should say ah tang. No, it's not that. If you really don't have money, you don't have to pay me back. But I don't want your shares. It reached that point. I'd rather just consider it a favor. I'll give you this money. What good are your shares?
Yes, your shares. I wouldn't even have a human connection left. Everyone was pessimistic, thinking they might default on the debt or something.
No one was optimistic. Then they went to the bank to negotiate. The bank also offered loans, but they calculated based on net assets. How could they know the value of this thing? Without physical collateral, they wouldn't lend money. It was too new. During this period, Pony Ma was already looking for other job opportunities, thinking, this isn't working. I'll go back to teaching. He thought he'd become Teacher Ma. After all this struggle, Li Qingzheng finally said, how about we try a new way to get money? This new method was called VC. They had already seen and understood this at the time. So, you see, Li Qingzheng's help was enormous. He was a very important pioneer. Li Qingzheng entrusted his alumnus, Xiaoyuzhou, to find IDG. We know IDG today as a very famous investment institution. It entered China very early and was already well known back then. At the time, to persuade his alumnus Xiaoyuzhou to approach IDG, Li Qingzheng even promised Xiaoyuzhou, as long as you successfully broker the deal, I'll give you 5% of Tencent's shares. Finally, they met Wang Shu, the head of IDG. Wang Shu met with Li Qingzheng and Pony Ma and said, it seems if we don't give you money, Tencent will die. But even if we do give you money, Tencent's prospects aren't clear. Pony Ma, how do you see your company's future?
First, he wanted to ask if they had confidence themselves.
Pony Ma's first reaction was, "Oh, I don't know. I still don't know. You're here to talk business with investors, and you say you don't have any ideas yourself?" But Xu Wang later recalled, "Seeing Pony Ma being so honest, I felt relieved. This is an honest person." In the end, IDG brought in Hong Kong Yinka to invest in Tencent together. Yinka was founded by Richard Li, Ka-shing Li's second son. It was a coincidence that during that period, Yinka had been looking for ways to do business in mainland China. So, both sides hit it off and invested in Tencent together. This timing was extremely precarious. If Xu Wang hadn't decided to invest then, it would have been trouble. Why? Because the dot-com bubble burst at the end of 2000. They received the money in April 2000. This was the eve of their legacy. This was fate. It patched up that missing piece. Getting back to Tencent's business first, there was the name change issue. Why change the name? Because in October 1999, AOL sent a stack of lawyers' letters threatening to sue. And they weren't really suing over product copying. Product copying is hard to sue over, to be honest. It was purely about the name. You cannot use OICQ. You must immediately stop using the OICQ domain. Charles Chen, who had studied law, told everyone, "This is how I see it. We don't have money. And even if we fight, we probably won't win. It's like heaven wants to rain and a mother wants to marry off her daughter, just let it be."
At that time, the sunk cost didn't feel high, and OICQ wasn't well known in China, so changing it was fine.
So, one day, Tencent's sixth employee, Xiao Guangwu, heard someone on the bus talking about OICQ. They weren't saying OICQ number because it's awkward. Friends wouldn't usually say, "How's your OICQ number?" Everyone just said, "Your Q number." That Q number and QQ number are actually just abbreviations.
That's folk wisdom, just give it to them.
It was like, just Q number, Q number. Maybe it was drawn out a bit with a trailing sound, and didn't it just become QQ number? When he came back and told Pony Ma, he said, "This name is great. From now on, we'll call it QQ."
And it didn't affect existing users' perception.
In November 2000, QQ burst onto the scene, simultaneously launching QQ Info Express and Tencent Browser. On this very day, Tencent officially transformed into an internet company. Before that, it was still a pager company, you could say. At this point, even though they had secured funding and weren't too affected by the dot-com bubble burst, IDG went bust. Investors had a lot of failed projects and wanted to pull out. They were asking if they could find a way to exit some investments and do another round. Tencent wasn't making money at this time, so what could be done? Under IDG's lead, they tried to sell it. Let's sell it to an internet company, they thought, because now your user base is decent. They directly approached Charles Jiang. "Will you buy it, Charles Jiang?" They directly approached Zhidong Wang. "Will you buy it, Zhidong Wang?" This also included Yahoo China and Lenovo. They basically had a round of talks with everyone. Back then, it was the era of portal websites. Rumor has it they even talked to Lei Jun, but Lei Jun later denied it himself, saying they never spoke. But you can see from all this that at the time, they were trying to see if they could sell it to these big internet companies. But they wouldn't buy it. They wouldn't buy it not because it wasn't profitable, but because they thought, this is just a small piece of software, we can make it ourselves. Exactly. With our technical capabilities, you only have a few people. We're a big company. Can't we do that? They looked down on it, didn't even consider it, weren't interested. Even Yinke tried to find a way out. Yinke also wanted to exit, so they approached Tom.com. Tom.com was considered part of the same family, but Tom.com wouldn't buy it either. Finally, Yinke even approached Wang Jing, asking if they could collaborate on a movie. They talked, but there was nothing to collaborate on. In that era, it was completely unheard of. During that period, Pony Ma was going through a very difficult time. According to an early employee, when he went to him for a signature during that period, Pony Ma looked completely disheveled. Messy hair, sallow complexion, bloodshot eyes, and he spoke with no energy. But look, it was fate. In January 2001, Dawei Wang, who claimed to be the China representative of a South African investment company, visited him in person. He said, "Our organization is called MIH, a South African company." At first listen, it sounded like a scammer. A South African company here. Never heard of it. Dawei Wang then introduced MIH as South Africa's largest pay TV operator. They had their own money and invested in many media companies, specifically in media-related industries. Dawei Wang said he discovered it while browsing internet cafes. On every computer, he could hear the dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee sound. This software is so popular, he thought, and decided to reach out. Pony Ma was thrilled. You understand me. You understand me. You have vision. He showed them QQ's user growth curve. It's now growing at a rate of daily new registrations that you wouldn't even dare to imagine. 500,000. 500,000 every day. Dawei Wang saw this and thought, wow, we have to invest. We have to invest. This is incredible. How could we not get in on this? We don't have much cash. Can we do a share swap? At the time, they had invested in a company called 21 ViaNet. Can we swap shares using this? Also, after the swap, can we become the controlling shareholder? These two conditions were very ambitious. Tencent didn't agree, so they rejected it. 2 months later, MIH contacted them again, saying, all right, we won't insist on those two conditions. We'll buy with cash. Let's discuss it. We shouldn't always try to get a bargain and bully people. Finally, IDG divested 2/3 of its shares, and Yinke divested all its shares. MIH acquired these shares from them, gaining a 32.5% stake, spending a little over 20 million. This 20 million was US dollars. In this round, Tencent's valuation had already reached over 60 million US dollars. What does that mean? In one fell swoop, it had reached Sina's funding amount. See? They must be regretting it now. It instantly became a top-funded unicorn company, and from being unable to sell for even 3 million back then, it became an internet star company with exceptionally abundant cash flow. It was indeed an early lesson for the president on just how powerful social software could be. It was fate. IDG had just sold its shares. In May 2001, Nasdaq bottomed out and rebounded. In the same month, QQ's registered users surpassed 100 million.
I should say, Yinke had just sold all its shares, while IDG still retained 1/3.
At the same time, there was more good news for Tencent. Mobile Dream Network, which we mentioned before, arrived. Its business grew bigger and bigger, and QQ survived. Not only did it survive, but it was about to thrive exceptionally well. We'll stop here for this time. Let's take a look, Xiaolei, at the group photo of the 5 people when they went public in the future. The 5 Tiger Generals, the founders' group photo.
Fast forward to when they went public. Ponyma was still very thin at that time. Among the 5 people, he clearly looked very thin, but in every photo, he stood in the center.
And he really looked like the youngest one. At this point, Li Qingzheng indeed looked even more like the boss. Xiaolei, take a look. QQ at that time was already quite similar to later versions. It had its own friend list, its own chat window. It's just that the overall interface style was still pretty old-fashioned.
Whether it was the buttons or the overall interface design, the complexity already showed many more features compared to what we saw at the very beginning.
Let's take a look at a photo of Mr. Ma from back then, sitting at his desk, presumably in his very first office.
By this point, computers weren't those old horizontal desktop units anymore, and Mr. Ma's hairstyle was already starting to be slicked back, giving him more of a boss-like appearance.
He no longer had that fresh-faced programmer look. He seemed more like a small business owner. We're now entering the second chapter, the rise of QQ. A grand vision unfolds. Even during the OICQ phase, Tencent had already launched mobile OICQ, predating mobile QQ. How did it work? Through mobile Monternet. This mobile Monternet was a partnership with China Mobile, which had just been established in 2000, enabling value-added services on the mobile side. By 2001, it evolved into mobile QQ. For those who haven't encountered it, the core idea was that SMS messages could be exchanged with QQ on the PC. You could send a message via SMS, and it would go directly to the recipient's QQ. And their QQ could reply directly to your SMS. This meant that even if your phone couldn't run QQ or access the internet, you could still connect with everyone via SMS. In 2000, Tencent was still struggling, but by the end of 2001, thanks to mobile Monternet, Tencent's revenue was calculated at 50 million, with a net profit of 10 million. It's still true. Where there's traffic, there's money. Almost all of it came from the mobile Monternet business. So before, it had traffic but couldn't monetize it. Commercialization still required. The number of registered users and daily active users was incredibly high back then. But I think there's still a difference when compared to SMS users. Yes, mainly because SMS had charges. As I mentioned before, Tencent was arguably the first internet company to actually make money. It started earning revenue even earlier than the 3 major portals, and that was precisely because of mobile QQ. In 2002, the number of SMS messages sent through mobile QQ accounted for what percentage of all mobile Modernet SMS messages? 70%. Out of every 10 mobile Modernet SMS messages, 7 were from mobile QQ. Of course, there was also some advertising revenue. Back then, QQ already had banner ads. These banner ads weren't placed on the main client page of the friend list. They were slapped right onto the chat window. Boom, a banner ad would appear. At its peak, this could generate over $1 million in ad revenue per month. In 2001, QQ also tried other things, like launching value-added services. This was in 2001, and they already had memberships. It was called QQ Club back then. Paid members could access extra features, primarily focusing on selecting premium numbers. For 10 yuan a month, you could choose a special number. They moved quite quickly, very quickly. Tencent claims QQ was the first to offer value-added services in the history of China's internet. When it launched, you could say it was like a tiny ripple in a vast ocean. Frequent reactions, yet no real impact. It wasn't very successful. At the time, out of hundreds of millions of users, only a few hundred subscribed to QQ Club because it wasn't a necessity. Plus, it had to do with the payment methods. Today, when we talk about paying for something, it seems like it's just a mental hurdle. But back then, it wasn't like that.
You had to mail it?
You had to go to the post office to spend 10 yuan to buy a QQ Club membership. That was just too much hassle. There was no online payment whatsoever. Around that time, QQ made another attempt called BQQ. That's BQQ or Business QQ. Even then, it already offered features like video conferencing and group SMS. Vanke reportedly even adopted BQQ back then, but it still wasn't very successful. In that era, the enterprise paid market itself was tiny, and companies weren't keen on spending money. Internal IM wasn't really a necessity. Plus, later on, MSN was also doing quite well and had entered China. BQQ eventually evolved into RTX Tencent Tong, which has always remained relatively obscure. Many people might not even have heard of it. For QQ, in February 2001, new registrations hit 1 million per day. Concurrently, the number of online users also reached 1 million. 1 million people chatting online simultaneously. Registered users surpassed 50 million.
From 500,000 a day back in 2000, it had grown to 1 million a day by the end of 2001.
At that time, People's Daily Online republished an article about this. Pony Ma would tell everyone he met, "Our company is in the People's Daily. Our company is in the People's Daily." In reality, it wasn't in the People's Daily itself, but on People's Daily Online. Still, you can imagine his excitement at the time, which is completely understandable. As the user base grew, server pressure became immense. Since there wasn't much revenue yet, costs had to be controlled. Tencent also had to combat gray market activities like malicious QQ number squatting. So, Tencent began to limit the release of new numbers and establish higher barriers. For instance, users had to register via SMS or by calling a voice information service, and this registration cost 1 yuan. Making calls and sending text cost money, and while that money didn't go to Tencent directly, and Tencent wasn't charging directly either, users genuinely couldn't register for QQ for free anymore. That sparked public outrage. Posts appeared online. For example, an article titled "Tencent QQ, You've Gone Too Far." The author urged everyone to boycott Tencent, claiming that now that Tencent had tasted success, they would go further and further down the path of charging fees. Forget registration. If they're charging for registration now, will they charge for logging in later? Will they charge for sending messages? Are they aiming to replace SMS? This is a monopoly, and a monopoly can breed an endless desire for a company to strip profits from users. You see, articles from that era were already analyzing it this way, very similar to many discussions today. A Beijing newspaper, Jingpin Shopping Guide, published an article titled "Learning from Email Registration Fees." Tencent's awkward imitation, implying that Tencent's website was no longer allowing free registrations, deliberately forcing users to pay. They weren't even using a straightforward "we're charging now" method. Instead, they made it impossible to register through normal channels. Your website wouldn't open, your web page wouldn't load, and you could only call, and calling cost money. That's how it was. As mentioned earlier, the money from calls and texts didn't go to Tencent, but Tencent's official free registration method also became unusable. People either couldn't open the website, or couldn't get in, or couldn't complete registration. In summary, the path was technically there, but you just couldn't complete it. The official stance was never, "we don't have it anymore," nor did they ever admit to it, but you simply couldn't do it through the free channels. This was the first time Tencent got flack, and it happened so early. People might not realize they were already getting criticized in 2001 and 2002. In March 2002, Tencent finally pushed through, despite the criticism, and launched QQ numbers for sale, including special numbers like birthday numbers. The general idea was, fine, we'll just charge openly and close the free channels. At this point, neither Tencent nor its users were happy. The ones who were happy were other companies. They all thought, Tencent is charging now. Our chance has finally come. We'll be free.
They seized the opportunity to grow.
There was a very well-known older generation company called Langma, which specialized in communications, and they launched Langma UC. NetEase launched NetEase Popo. Sina launched Sina Chat. Sohu had Sohu Find Me. Yahoo had Yahoo Messenger, and so on. Surrounded on all sides, everyone started developing their own. This was a very serious early mistake for Tencent. They themselves reflected on it, realizing they shouldn't have done it that way. They had essentially invited the wolves in. It wasn't until June 2003, over a year later, that Ponyma decided to reopen completely free registration. Many of our friends who registered later probably did so after this period, so they could all register for free. But by then, they already had quite a few rivals, and it took some effort to compete with them later on. QQ's previous explorations hadn't been very successful. So, what successful explorations did they have? Let's talk about that next. In 2002, QQ launched the QQ group feature. Group chats seem commonplace today, but back then, people didn't really know what they were. When Tencent first created it, the idea was simple. If people needed to discuss something, like where to eat lunch, sending messages one by one to everyone was cumbersome. So, why not just bring everyone together to chat? That's how groups first appeared. QQ had groups back then, and QQ's activity level increased even further. You know the effect that creating a group has on activity who doesn't love to gossip a little? Another feature was truly remarkable. In 2001, a man named Xu Liang joined Tencent. He graduated from Wuhan University with an economics degree in 1999, but his 2 years of entrepreneurship had failed, so he reluctantly joined Tencent. His original position was promotion manager. But then he lost his phone. After losing his phone, due to all the hassle, he reported to work several days late. Tencent told him the position was gone. With the opportunity fleeting, they offered him a product manager role as a second best option. What's a product manager? It's someone who researches products, comes up with ideas, right? To see what they can do. So, Xu Liang went to research. As he researched, he discovered a Korean social networking site called C Club, a talking club. A core feature within C Club was avatar. The term avatar originally means a virtual image, a digital embodiment. What was this feature? You could change your appearance, hairstyle, expressions, scenes, and so on. Not only did he research avatars, but he also gathered data. By the end of 2000, C Club had over 60,000 paying users willing to buy these avatars. A year later, that number jumped to 1.5 million, over 1 million people buying them. He thought, how many people are there in Korea? And so many are buying these avatars. Each user spent the equivalent of 5Q coin per month. All sorts of online chat rooms and forums in Korea, anywhere you could chat, were equipped with avatar features. This was incredible. He realized this was something truly worth imitating. The first to implement avatar features in China wasn't Tencent, it was William Ding's Popo. NetEase Popo had avatars earliest. Another website called Youlian also launched this avatar feature. Xu Liang conducted his research and created a PPT. And this PPT wasn't just pie in the sky or about how great this thing would be in the future. It had concrete operational steps. He presented a detailed plan on how to implement avatars within QQ, explaining why and how to do it. After seeing it, Li Qingzheng really liked the proposal. Li Qingzheng thought, this is good. But whether to proceed wasn't Li Qingzheng's decision. Li Qingzheng was more on the operations and sales side. It had to be decided by product and R&D. Who was in product and R&D? Tony Zhang. Tony Zhang said, excellent, do it immediately. He also said, you approve of it. But one person objected, Ponyma. Ponyma was a bit against it. His point was, no matter how I think about it, I can't understand why someone would spend money on virtual clothes. Why? What's the point? But this is where Ponyma was brilliant. Even though he didn't understand it, since everyone else agreed, he thought, well, it might be worth a try. Go ahead and try it then. Tencent's avatar team was formed and quickly got to work. In just over 2 months, Tencent's own avatar feature was launched, named QQ Show. In January 2003, a childhood memory for many of us, QQ Show was released. Clothing, accessories, and scenes could all be purchased and even sent as gifts. I remember back then, probably in junior high, I spent a fortune buying the same outfit as a girl I liked, essentially forcing her into a couple's outfit. I think it cost 5 Q coin.
And who knows if they even saw it?
He saw it and immediately changed it.
Oh, what a sad story. My goodness.
A sad story. I never bought another one. You can't keep chasing someone who keeps changing their mind.
You're just comparing who has deeper pockets with them.
That's just insane.
And there's a whole story behind that. Back then, I only ever used the free versions.
Right. I basically only bought it for those few special occasions. It's not like my family was that well off. QQ Show launched for half a year. 500 people purchased the service with an average spend of 5 yuan. That's actually not bad.
Wouldn't you think that's a very small number? Only 500 people in half a year?
It started out relatively small, but it was completely different from paying to register a QQ account. They observed public opinion, and the entire sentiment was very positive. It was like, I'm willing to spend this money, and those who did wouldn't say things like, Tencent is just collecting dirty money. So, Tencent gained more confidence in this area. QQ Show was also particularly important in my childhood memories. It was like how everyone used to discuss QQ, NetEase, Popo, and other IM tools. Before, they all felt similar. But after QQ Show, people felt QQ was a bit different. It had some viral spread capabilities, and it also seemed younger and more fun. I basically only felt QQ was different from the others after QQ Show came out because I had a computer back then, and we got computers relatively early. I used NetEase Popo for a long time, and then later found that QQ was indeed a bit more fun than NetEase Popo. This was truly a major discovery for Tencent. The mobile dream network was, after all, a short-term lifeline. For QQ to figure out how to make money reliably in the future, QQ Show was its first successful attempt. They had always wanted to offer value-added services before, but QQ Club didn't take off. QQ Show, on the other hand, became an opportunity. Value-added services then became Tencent's foundation. QQ Show was a very important part of that. It was a crucial turning point for Tencent's transformation. Without QQ Show, there wouldn't have been the later commercial products that allowed QQ to make money.
As a regular user, you probably wouldn't even realize that.
You see, before it was just over 500. Slowly, QQ Show really took off, becoming a huge success. Hey, with QQ Show's popularity, QQ's virtual currency, QCoin, and the QQ Show Red Diamond membership at the end of 2003 also soared. Red Diamond, as we mentioned earlier, was the QQ Show membership. It was 10 yuan a month for a subscription, and every day you could directly change outfits, choosing from those included in the package. Later, because Red Diamond became so popular, other diamonds of different colors also became a classic paid membership design for QQ. Speaking of memberships, I also want to mention a feature launched in 2003. This feature was incredibly important for boosting QQ's activity, QQ Level. The online market also launched in 2003.
It launched in 2003. I think that's times what was truly useful because it was free, and it had a massive user base.
Back then, a lot of people would idle their accounts to boost their QQ level, even asking others to do it for them. But honestly, that could pollute the login status. I remember that after 2003 or 2004, when I was chatting with people, they'd often appear online but wouldn't say anything. Invisible was a later feature. It wasn't around back then. Right? And then later, the invisible feature came out. See? What a fancy way to put it. Pollute login status. Yes, QQ level. I wonder if Xiaolei still remembers. The most basic level was stars. Stars upgraded to moons, moons to suns, and after suns came crowns. In our day, it was mostly suns and later crowns. 4 stars made 1 moon, 4 moons made 1 sun, 4 suns made 1 crown. And after 4 crowns, that was it.
Let me put it this way. When we graduated from college, we had 2 couples among our classmates who had already idled their future children's QQ accounts all the way up to the sun level.
In the future, it will be your asset. I'll really talk about this later. Many netizens mentioned it at the time. He genuinely wanted to get 2 sun accounts for his future 2 children. That was a very popular practice at the time. QQ membership also suddenly took off during this period. Previously, the value-added services offered by QQ Club didn't have much appeal. But now, QQ membership offered popping with double acceleration. Besides popping, there was another very important feature which seemed simple but was understandable. The red diamond display. Your friends' names would be red and appear at the top of the list. It was simple and effective. Just that simple red diamond display feature immediately made it shine, immediately creating a sense of vanity. QQ membership directly became the most important paid service. QQ membership was different from other diamonds. It was a dedicated membership system. This membership also cost 10 RMB a month. I checked mine. My membership is 1 crown, 1 sun, 2 moons, and 2 stars, level 90. Back then, having a sun was pretty good. I actually have a crown, which I had completely forgotten about. That means I have at least 5 suns. I was really obsessed with it. Now, looking at my crown, it's no longer surprising or impressive, as I don't use QQ at all anymore. Calculated, level 90 is 8,460 natural days or 23 years, but because of acceleration, it works out to about a decade. Still, that's quite exaggerated. So, you paid for membership quite a lot. Yes, I paid for several years. A decade or more is indeed quite exaggerated, because later, to promote its own products, Tencent would often release things like, install QQ PC Manager for acceleration, install that for acceleration, do this for acceleration. Recently, just this year, in June 2025, there was hot news. The world's first max-level user, a user with 4 crowns, appeared. A level 256 QQ user. The username is Love Mustard. I also love mustard. To love QQ that much. Level 256, that's just terrifying. How many suns is that? 4 times 4, 16 suns.
By rights, this account could sell for some money, but I guess he won't sell it.
Tencent directly gave him gold. They gave him a golden QQ. Anyway, you can search for the news. It's an authenticated account. Selling it wouldn't be as good as him holding on to it. He has the motivation, so he won't sell this account. So, as Xiaoyuzhou just mentioned, later there was the invisible feature. With popping came invisible. With invisible, you didn't want to be seen. After invisible, there was visible while invisible. And after visible while invisible, there was online but invisible to them. Anyway, many different features like these came out, right? This feature was quite ambiguous. For example, who would you make visible while invisible to? Wouldn't it be someone you really liked? Someone you really wanted to talk to? But if that person who you made visible while invisible to was online and didn't talk to you, how would you feel? You might feel quite sad. Anyway, these were all little stories everyone encountered back then, leading to many short essays. You see, QQ's value-added services kept getting better. Next, we need to talk about QQ's portal. QQ's portal also existed very early on. Speaking of building a portal, you first need the QQ.com domain. It's very interesting. Back then, Tencent's legal team searched for QQ.com. Obviously, because it's a very short domain, someone had registered it a long time ago. It was an American who put it up for sale online asking for over 20 million RMB. When they saw 20 million, they definitely weren't going to buy it. At this point, Dawei Wang, the former head of MIH China whom we mentioned earlier, who later also joined Tencent, many investors joined Tencent, Dawei Wang went to negotiate with the American. How much did he eventually negotiate it down to? 500,000 RMB. From 20 million to 500,000. The 20 million was just a casual asking price. He knew it wouldn't sell. It was also a good time during the dot-com bubble. Honestly, a 2-letter domain like that couldn't have sold for so cheap, 500,000 RMB. In July 2003, Zhonghuai Sun, a content director who had worked at NetEase and Tom.com, led the team to establish the website department. This was when they finally started doing news and portals. The department was set up in Beijing, which was Tencent's earliest business in Beijing. Initially, the website department was unremarkable, as there were already 3 major portals, and QQ didn't have any new advantages. During the August 2004 Olympics, the QQ client offered a mini homepage, essentially adding a banner. This banner displayed the latest Olympic updates and could redirect you to the official website with a click. Don't underestimate such a small feature. Given QQ's massive user base and people's interest in the Olympics, after the Olympics, Tencent.com directly became the 4th largest portal website in China, a solid 4th place. Tencent's portal, for a long time, focused more on its QQ user base, which was a younger demographic. Conversely, its influence in public events and news was not as good as other portals. It wasn't until 2006 that Tencent.com's traffic surpassed Sina.com. By then, QQ was indeed a truly national application.
It could consistently bring in traffic.
If it weren't for these other attempts we mentioned earlier, whether it was portal websites or value-added services, if you had truly rested on the laurels of mobile Monternet and just counted money from its profits, you would have been in trouble. Because mobile Motornet changed very quickly. In the early days, the revenue split mobile Motornet offered was very generous. The money it earned from SMS was given to platforms like Tencent, including the 3 major portals, at an 85% rate. Mobile Motornet itself only took 15%. Of course, mobile Motornet also had its own SMS fees and operator fees, which were calculated separately. So, for these SMS value-added fees, it only took a small cut. By 2004, the revenue split was directly set at 50/50, and it was presented as a non-negotiable notice. This is how it is now. We've tightened things up. Take it or leave it. Several portal websites were also very anxious at that time, all starting to look for their own way out. We've briefly discussed that period before. Another point is, who was Mobile QQ's biggest competitor later on? China Telecom itself started to get involved. In 2005, China Telecom launched a product called VRM. This VRM allowed communication between fixed lines, PHS, and mobile phones. This was China Telecom's main product before Fashion. The following year, Fashion was launched. So, in 2006, Fashion directly competed with Mobile QQ. They were partners before, right? Now, it was like, if you can do it, I can do it. Why should I cooperate with a private company? I'll just do it myself. They must have realized the crisis. And China Mobile directly told Tencent, either you cooperate with Fashion, or Mobile Motornet will cut ties with Tencent. How do you think Tencent chose? What choice did they have? They could only choose to cooperate. So, Mobile QQ and Mobile QQ are different. Mobile QQ specifically referred to the QQ that could be used on Mobile Motornet. Mobile QQ then merged with Fashion. By the end of 2006, Mobile QQ became Fashion QQ. At that time, you could still download Fashion QQ, a product specifically for chatting on QQ. I honestly never used it, or maybe I did, but I don't have much memory of it. It was called Fashion QQ back then. So, you see, from around 2006, you basically didn't see internet companies getting much so-called SP revenue. Internet value-added services then became Tencent's main source of income. In 2005, the proportion of internet value-added services in Tencent's revenue rose from 38.5% to 55.1%, becoming the primary driver. This was also a very impressive second growth curve. If you only have one growth curve, a company might just go under. By 2003 to 2004, QQ's interface was already a style we were relatively familiar with. Let's have Xiaolei take a look.
Before, the interfaces were basically black and white. Now, recalling what Lu Fei just said, first, there was QQ Show, and second, the banners at the top had all sorts of things that could be pushed to you, whether it was advertisements or information. The elements became much richer, and it wasn't black and white anymore. Even with operating systems reaching the XP generation, the overall richness increased. After it became a blue background, the UI was continuously improving.
The interface design used a light blue, which made it look more youthful. It wasn't that old-fashioned gray and white anymore. During this period, QQ grew very rapidly. Young people were all using it. But the old money bosses didn't understand or like it. There's a very classic historical record, a TV program where the audience consisted of bigwigs from traditional industries or earlier internet and tech companies. For example, Shu Lihu from the media world, Shi Wang from real estate, Tong Chen from Sina, and Rumen Zhang from home appliances, who is also the founder of Haier. Pony Ma was invited onto the stage to promote his QQ. Let's listen to a segment from that.
Old Wu, Mr. Long, and Rumen Zhang didn't use it before. Alright, I think today is a particularly good opportunity for you. Let's also invite Rumen Zhang to take a shot. Because for anyone over 35, not using QQ might be a big loss for you. Facing such a high-quality client, launch your fierce offensive and convince him to use QQ.
I can introduce it to you. QQ is an instant messaging product. And instant messaging in the internet environment is a very convenient new communication method for people to connect and communicate. Just like telephones and email, people can use this communication tool for private communication between friends. But in reality, instant messaging, QQ, can also be used in the workplace for communication between colleagues within a company. Company management can also become a flattened, very humanized form of management, especially with this upcoming project for hire.
Have I convinced you to make a decision to use it or not?
You haven't convinced me yet.
The last speaker was Mr. Rumen Zhang. This was actually one of the earliest exchanges between two generations of entrepreneurs.
And in this exchange, some comments also mentioned that Pony Ma was standing there, looking very young, still a bit shy, even appearing to be in a state of being judged or evaluated. Below, Rumen Zhang was sitting there, commenting like a judge. seemingly giving advice as a senior. Many comments said, "This is young and poor in its later stages." Back then, Pony Ma was like that, but now he's like this, already old money.
It's not necessarily about bullying the young and poor. Anyway, at that stage of development, that was simply his position.
Or rather, some old money bosses didn't quite understand. So, you see, those bosses who were in traditional industries back then probably truly couldn't have imagined how much the internet would influence things today. Because in that era, people could see internet companies like Sina and Sohu doing very well, but they mainly thought, oh, they just do news, right? The internet represents information, so doing information retrieval and search engines is fine. But why would it have such a huge impact today? In our lives today, we simply cannot do without the internet. Let's go back to Tencent. By this stage, Tencent's organizational structure was well established, and the roles of the co-founders became clearer. Pony Ma was CEO, Li Qingzheng was COO, Tony Zhang was CTO, Charles Chen was CAO, mainly responsible for administration and logistics. He was the one who handled buying those penguin ceramic jars, right? Xiaoyuzhou was CIO, responsible for news and portal websites. All 5 of these guys held O titles. Later, CFO Shuohan Luo also joined during this period, responsible for finance. So, you see, this is quite a rare phenomenon among Chinese internet companies. They were classmates since junior high, good friends all through college, and have remained good friends for over a decade even today. It's quite a remarkable experience. Their strong personal relationships made the company relatively stable. Pony Ma sometimes recalls that conflicts and friction were inevitable when running the company with these partners, but because they knew each other so well, it was easier to reach an agreement later.
It might indeed reduce a lot of unnecessary speculation.
It all comes down to trust. That long-standing trust. So, some people say it's not good for friends or classmates to start businesses together, that they shouldn't, but that's not necessarily true. Look at how well they did. It really depends on the people or the situation.
It's because entrepreneurship itself generates a lot of conflicts. That's how I see it. The saying, "Don't start a business with close friends," is because these ventures inherently create conflicts. If you can't handle those conflicts well, that relationship is wasted, right? It's risky. But for some people, if the relationship is truly strong enough, they might be able to better mend those conflicts.
By this stage, Tencent had also moved from its rented office in Shenzhen SEG to the FIYTA building in Nanshan District. The FIYTA building is still a memorable landmark for many veteran Tencent employees. It's still there today. When I used to visit Tencent, I'd pass by it, and everyone would point it out as where Tencent used to be, right next to today's Tencent building. There's another interesting aspect to their early organizational culture. Tencent didn't use a voting or democratic mechanism. On the surface, a democratic mechanism might sound reliable, where a few people vote to decide on issues. But it can lead to problems. For example, if you're in charge of a business, and a proposal you oppose gets voted through by others, and then you have to execute that project, it becomes incredibly frustrating and difficult. So, it was whoever is in charge, proposes, and is responsible. If you were really passionate about doing something, as long as the partners present didn't have an extremely strong objection, like, "If you do this, I'm out," then you could proceed. Everyone would discuss it and offer suggestions, but you had to genuinely believe in the project yourself, rather than everyone voting and saying, "It's you," and the bosses agreeing, only for you to mess it up in the end. It's very simple. Whoever uses it decides. Pony Ma himself isn't someone who offers a lot of strong opinions. He usually discusses things with everyone, and he acts as a participant to balance different opinions, rather than dictating what you or someone else should do. He's not that kind of boss. It's quite interesting. The company's product manager system is also very interesting. It's not about the market deciding what to do, nor is it about technology deciding what to do. Instead, small units led by product managers drive a project. For example, like the QQ show mentioned earlier, it wasn't handed over to a specific boss or department. Instead, he pulled some engineers and had Liang Shu lead a virtual project team as the product manager. This allowed everyone to have a greater sense of ownership rather than a department having 5 or 6 projects. With engineers simultaneously working on this and that, losing their sense of involvement or ownership. It allowed for more focus. If you've seen Pony Ma's public appearances, you might have an impression of his personal style. It was quite different from the common style of many internet moguls back then. In 2002, when he attended the 3rd Westlake Forum organized by Jack Ma, the Qianjiang Evening News, a Hangzhou newspaper, described him this way: Pony Ma, the creator of QQ, is dubbed Mr. QQ. But he's very different from the pioneering avant-garde image QQ projects. Pony Ma is not trendy at all. Although he looks quite young in his casual suit, and his gold-rimmed glasses add a touch of scholarly refinement, he doesn't look like the internet hero who created that adorable little guy. Even if he wore a red scarf around his neck, he wouldn't look anything like QQ. This is quite interesting. And at the Westlake Forum that day, Xiaoyuzhou was present. Xiaoyuzhou even said on the spot, "Among the five of us, only Pony Ma is the least mature." Everyone was shocked at the time, thinking, is it appropriate to say that about someone? Xiaoyuzhou slowly and leisurely added, well, the four of us are married, and the reason he isn't married isn't exactly flattering. Pony Ma was in the midst of a fierce battle in the internet world back then. In an era with a martial arts spirit, his temperament wasn't highly regarded. But if you think about it, in today's era, many people actually prefer that kind of personality. Times have changed. Back then, he was still very, very steady. We can see from many things Tencent did later that he always took a very stable approach. In the autumn of 2003, Pony Ma met a very important person named Martin Lau. Martin Lau also had a very good impression of Pony Ma. He said Pony Ma's logic was very strong, and he wasn't someone who would easily show his hand. At that time, Martin Lau was an executive director at Goldman Sachs Asia Investment Bank, a very high-ranking position. He was a big shot in the financial industry, someone who had a gilded career path, coming up through Michigan, Stanford, and McKinsey. In 1998, Martin Lau led Goldman Sachs in participating in the restructuring of the Youthful Group. This was an extraordinary case back then, successfully turning the Youthful Group, which had over 20 billion Hong Kong dollars in debt, profitable by 2002. This was considered, or rather in 2001, it was awarded by International Financial Review as the best restructuring deal in all of Asia. The praise for this restructuring was extremely high, and Martin Lau's reputation soared because of it. Why did they meet Martin Lau? At the time, it was to discuss the IPO. Both had a good impression of each other, finding each other practical and intelligent. They quickly reached an agreement, and Tencent decided to list in Hong Kong. Why Hong Kong? Because, on one hand, the story was harder to tell in the US. Chinese concept stocks listing in the US at that time had a certain formula. You had to say, I'm the Chinese version of X. QQ didn't have a direct counterpart. It was hard to tell that story. Hard to make it sound grand. On the other hand, Pony Ma also preferred stability. The Hong Kong stock market seemed more stable at the time. It wouldn't have the wild fluctuations of the US market. After comprehensive consideration, on June 16, 2004, with Martin Lau's push, Tencent successfully went public. It was a good day. Why was it a good day? It doesn't matter. I just think it was a good day. Oh, well, June 16th because it sounds smooth, right? Smooth. Anyway, it's the 6th.
June 6th. My mistake. Let's adjust the atmosphere and continue.
After its IPO on June 16th, it wasn't all that glamorous, because at that time, much of the internet's attention was still on Tom.com and Shanda. Tencent wasn't as well known as them back then, especially compared to Tian Qiaochen. Tian Qiaochen, at just 31, became China's richest man, shaking up the business world and surpassing William Ding. To have someone barely in their early 30s become the wealthiest person in China at that time was unimaginable.
We've missed out on being the richest for years now.
Don't even mention it. Give us another 300 years, and it'd still be tough.
You still dare to use a word like unlikely?
After Tencent went public, Martin Lau joined Tencent at the end of the year, becoming the Chief Strategy Officer, CSO. This marked the beginning of Tencent transforming into an investment group. Later, we saw Tencent frequently merging with, acquiring, and investing in various companies, all of which had strong ties to Martin Lau. You see, it follows the same logic we discussed earlier. If your partners truly resonate with your corporate values, they'll join you and contribute more. At that time, Charles Chen, he told Martin Lau, Charles Chen is in charge of administration, right? So he's in charge of payroll. He told Martin Lau, sorry buddy, your salary after you join, we can't afford it. Not that we can't afford it, but you'll have to take a pay cut. You'll get 2/3 less than at Goldman Sachs. Martin Lau said, no problem. Maybe one day, Tencent stock will multiply by 100, increase by 100 times. If you actually calculate it, today's Tencent stock is 500 times what it was when it went public. Oh my goodness. At that time, what he said might actually come true. Soon after Martin Lau joined Tencent, he acquired several companies. You can see how great his contribution was. In 2005, he joined at the end of 2004, and in 2005, he acquired Foxmail. The boss was Alan Zhang. This was truly a series of coincidences, the gears of fate. In 2005, Tencent's annual revenue was 1.4 billion RMB. Although 1.4 billion RMB was a lot, much higher than Tencent's previous revenue, it was still not the most dazzling among internet companies. At that time, Sina's revenue was still 190 million US dollars, and NetEase's was 210 million US dollars, both higher than Tencent's. But the groundwork had already been laid. This is truly fate. In this very year, just like when Baidu was at its peak, Tencent was already working on WeChat. Now, when Sina and NetEase were at their peak, Tencent had already acquired Alan Zhang. These are all similar coincidences. After Tencent went public, the battle situation was no longer the wild exploratory stage of the internet, where everyone was just trying this and that. It was different now. It was now a commercial war between big companies with open and hidden attacks. The first to directly challenge QQ was Pony Ma's old friend William Ding, with whom he used to drink and chat in Shenzhen. At the end of 2003, NetEase Popo launched an activity, popping to get free SMS. At that time, SMS was still for daily communication. Today, people use it to receive verification codes. Back then, it was a very important channel for daily communication, and SMS fees were consistently high. So, at that time, being online for a day, they directly gave away 120 SMS messages, and everyone was online every day. Oh my goodness, people were crazy about popping. They invested so much that within a year, registered users exceeded 15 million, and concurrent online users reached 500,000. It was the standard national-level second-largest instant messaging software. So, I used it back then too. In June 2004, William Ding announced at a press conference, "Our NetEase Popo has achieved one thing. We've enabled voice communication through mobile networks, reaching the quality of phone communication under GSM signals. This was incredible. When it was released, everyone immediately said, "Isn't this going to cut off those other services?" And indeed, because of people's speculation, it was later suppressed and couldn't proceed. There was still pressure from above. In July 2005, the Ministry of Information Industry issued a notice explicitly stating that, except for China Telecom and China Unicom, which could conduct commercial trials of PC-to-phone internet calls in some areas, no other unit or individual was allowed to engage in this business. Under this regulation, it couldn't continue. If it weren't for this regulation, NetEase Popo might have run even faster than QQ. This was a very important turning point. Yes, today WeChat has realized this, but indeed there have been many twists and turns and pressures in between. NetEase Popo was one aspect, but NetEase Popo's battle didn't last too long. QQ, because of the various new value-added services mentioned earlier, was still more attractive than Popo. But for QQ, the biggest competitor also emerged in 2004. In the same year, Bill Gates personally came to China, stating that MSN would also take active steps. 2 months later, market and R&D centers were established in Beijing and Shanghai, respectively. Things were stirring. He said, Tencent's diversified development might be a weakness. After diversified development, how much strength does it still have concentrated on instant messaging? This was undoubtedly a challenge he posed to himself. At that time, it caused such public opinion, anyway, for Tencent.
That statement, whether you look at it historically or in terms of the future, holds true.
At this time, those IM tools were still around. The UC launched by Langma Company, mentioned earlier, was acquired by Sina and called Sina UC. We briefly mentioned this when talking about Sina. This is not the UC browser. That UC. Skype entered China through Tom.com. Sohu, China Netcom, Alibaba, etc. all had their own IM tools. At this time, QQ's pressure began to increase. The timing was right. At this time, when SP services were declining, Mobile Dream Network was no longer a money-making tool for everyone. It became a channel for working for China Mobile. They were collectively eliminated. SP Business no longer existed. Hong Kong's Tom.com originally survived on SP Business. What to do at this time? They even started to engage in borderline activities. Hong Kong's Tom.com did a classic thing at that time. They rented a house in the suburbs of Beijing and hired hundreds of women to chat with people through 1,259 phone numbers. They talked about erotic content. This business even had a professional term back then called interactive voice response service. Was this sustainable? Of course it wasn't sustainable. Then this thing later faded from history, and Tom.com also slowly disappeared.
If you calculate the cost effectiveness, it should be quite high.
What kind of cost effectiveness? The cost effectiveness of making money. It does make money, but illegal things, of course, are profitable. As mentioned earlier, after the original mobile QQ became Fashion QQ, Tencent also had to adapt. So, they developed their own mobile version of QQ, which is Mobile QQ. Mobile QQ and Fashion QQ were still two different products, as we explained earlier. QQ software happened to catch up with the era when phones could install software. Motorola and Nokia discussed pre-installation with them. So, many versions of Motorola and Nokia phones could pre-install QQ. Initially, they charged a service fee. You had to pay to use Mobile QQ. Later, it became free. Mobile QQ also started to gain traction. In addition, there was something called Super QQ. Super QQ was quite popular for a while, equivalent to a second Mobile QQ with a monthly fee of 10 yuan. It could also stay online. A product that could stay online. Then, it's obvious that after Fashion QQ's SMS gradually faded from history, it didn't have much influence. Mobile QQ became the main force, including the later launched Mobile QQ game platform, MobileQQ.com, Mobile QQ browser, Mobile Security Manager, and so on, which were successively released over many years. This is still a blessing in disguise. The breakup with Mobile Dream Network gave Tencent the motivation to develop mobile software. So, Tencent was one of the earliest internet companies to go mobile. Earlier, when we talked about Baidu, Robin Lee still thought that going mobile wasn't a good idea until 2011, like drunk driving. But you see, Tencent, basically in 2006 to 2007, had already started to enter the game. This was really very early. You can see the difference between him and other bosses. In 2005, which was already 20 years ago, Pony Ma said, "There's a market of over 10 billion yuan in unlimited value-added services, and we must enter it. Online games have a market of over 7 billion yuan. Tencent cannot give up. Advertising has a market of over 3 billion yuan. Tencent cannot give up. Tencent also cannot give up search and e-commerce. Both must be done. These markets are all very quantifiable. Which market is the biggest? I'll go research how to do that market." This is how he strategized.
You see, at that time, their annual revenue was 1.4 billion. Every direction he looked at had a potential market size larger than their entire annual revenue.
This is a classic example of a quantitative research-backed decision. It wasn't just a qualitative judgment. They genuinely conducted analysis. Based on this, they did one thing. They directly restructured their organization. Their organizational structure was designed for the future, establishing 5 business units, B0 to B4. That's quite programmer-like, starting from 0, B0, B1, B2, B3, B4. These were respectively corporate development, which is related to investment and strategy, led by Martin Lau. The second, wireless business, meaning the SP business, led by Chengmin Liu. The third, internet business, primarily QQ-centric, led by Xiaoguang Wu. The fourth, interactive entertainment business, online games, led by Stephen Ren. And the fifth, web media, the portal business, led by Chen Yexu. These 5 businesses essentially covered all the various operations they were doing and planned to do in the future. Of course, from this point on, Tencent Group faced significant controversy. Why do you want to do everything? What are you trying to achieve? An article in Internet Weekly was famously titled, "Pony Ma Appears Strong. Tencent Monopolizes Chinese Online Life." It mentioned that Pony Ma would face competition from all internet companies and could easily get lost in diversified expansion. Because as we've seen before, Caffè Breve has also discussed many instances of other industries getting lost when they overinvest, overexpand, and over-diversify. If you bite off more than you can chew, you're bound to stumble.
This still ties back to what was just said, regardless of past or future. That statement certainly has its valid points, and there will be many positive examples to demonstrate its correctness.
This was indeed the reality. Back then, internet giants like Sina, Sohu, NetEase, and Shanda were all in direct competition with Tencent. Everyone really disliked Pony Ma. In September 2005, Tencent ventured into e-commerce, launching PaiPai.com, directly competing with Jack Ma. By March 2006, PaiPai.com already had over 6 million registered users. It's hard for people to imagine that Tencent once ran its own e-commerce platform. The memory has faded. In between, Jack Ma and Pony Ma even had some verbal spats. Jack Ma claimed Pony Ma was unprofessional, and their e-commerce platform kept poaching talent from Taobao. Pony Ma explained that the natural flow of talent is normal, and results would speak for themselves. In the same year, Tencent also launched Soso.com, directly competing with Robin Lee, initiating an all-out war. While other companies might have some friction, it was rare to see such comprehensive warfare as Tencent's. That year, Professor Cheng Linfeng wrote a very famous article titled Pony Ma, Public Enemy. Public Enemy had become the most common title or label people used to describe Pony Ma. In terms of competition, if we're talking about a real threat to QQ and their core business, it was still MSN Messenger. I remember using MSN quite a lot back then. MSN, without any promotion whatsoever because it was always a global business. And at that time, Chinese people could freely use foreign products gained an 11% market share in China through organic traffic alone. This was incredibly exaggerated. Yet, according to third-party data, among over 20 million business professionals in China, MSN users accounted for 53%, surpassing QQ. This was because people weren't fond of QQ. It had various features that appealed to young people but not business professionals. Another astonishing piece of data was that in the past 2 years, 95% of MSN's new users came from users who had abandoned QQ. It indicated that some people disliked using QQ and actively sought alternatives, rather than being initially attracted to MSN. Microsoft headquarters was greatly shocked when they saw this data. They're all flowing over. We need to quickly catch them. This is a windfall from heaven. We must seize it, even if we have to catch it with the back of our heads.
It's too hot to handle.
The key figure dispatched to China at that time was Minghua Xiong, who was quite renowned. Born in 1965, he wasn't young. He was MSN's Chinese product manager and a major contributor to IE's success in defeating Netscape Navigator. He was the product lead when they took down Netscape. Minghua Xiong then led the team to establish MSN China. When he arrived in China, Tony Zhang even pulled some strings, suggesting they have a meal. During their meeting, Tony Zhang directly tried to poach him, asking if he'd like to work at Tencent. You're new here, unfamiliar with the place, I invite you to join us. Minghua Xiong just smiled it off. Why? In that era, Microsoft was considered a godlike entity. What was Tencent? Second rate in every aspect. Even though you were engaged in an all-out war, everything you did besides QQ was mediocre, and your technology was just average, right? They looked down on Tencent. The lines stretched out of the classrooms, 100, 200 meters long, with resumes piled high. Tencent's side, in contrast, was deserted. Relatively speaking, almost no students from the top-ranked universities nationwide, the top 10 schools, were willing to go to Tencent. Everyone wanted to join Microsoft because, after 2001, Microsoft was already considered the king of global computer software, its throne firmly secured. If you were in tech or IT, how could you not go to Microsoft? Microsoft was absolutely the best place to be. So, at that time, Minghua Xiong essentially said, I don't need to go there. That's what we're talking about. So, back then, they had high hopes for MSN. This was the overall interface of MSN at the time. You'd feel that the overall UI design was somewhat similar to QQ, but it was more concise. Essentially, it had fewer features packed in.
My assessment is that it looked more sophisticated. This interface overall still had the look and feel of the XP era.
It lacked those youthful, flashy design elements. From Tencent's perspective, QQ had never managed to break into the business market, and that was a real pain point. To attract business professionals, Tencent decided to develop an email service. They felt that MSN, within Microsoft's ecosystem, offered more than just MSN Messenger. It had a whole suite of business products. Tencent was anxious about this. So, at that time, Tencent was determined to improve its email service. QQ Mail actually already existed before 2005, but it was extremely poor. Out of over 100 million QQ users, less than 1% used QQ Mail. The email service was so bad back then, which is why Foxmail was mentioned, and why Alan Zhang was brought in to lead it. That was the initial intention, and yes, it was fate the result of various contributing factors. To directly compete with MSN, QQ launched a product called TM, Tencent Messenger. I remember it. I quite liked using it. When it was promoted back then, they said it had fewer ads, was simpler to use, and was good for regular conversations.
I remember using it. I can recall using it.
But I looked it up, and it didn't make much of a splash back then. Many friends don't really remember it. Xiaolei, take a look. You could say this interface doesn't really resemble QQ anymore. It's very close to MSN. When Microsoft came to China to do this, it's hard to imagine. When I looked at historical data, I specifically verified it from multiple sources, and it's hard to imagine that Microsoft's approach back then was not like what you'd see today. Minghua Xiong was the industry head, while Chuan Luo led the marketing team in Beijing and Shanghai. What did Chuan Luo do at that time? He directly introduced state-owned assets from Shanghai. a wholly owned company called Lianhe. Microsoft and Lianhe jointly established Shanghai Wickersoft, with Juntang serving as CEO. This was when Juntang was at his peak. The Shanghai mayor and Microsoft CTO signed at the event. For a foreign company entering China to have such a grand launch, people were already very surprised at the time. Plus, it had the direct endorsement of the Shanghai mayor. Everyone thought, this is huge. Tencent must be feeling the pressure. You're from Shenzhen, and Shanghai is coming after you. Which is Shanghai MSN Network Communication Technology Co. Limited. MSN here means MSN. Chuan Luo was the president of this company. So, the MSN company was doing MSN, and Shanghai Wickersoft was Microsoft China's marketing arm. Juntang was the boss. Why have we been talking about MSN Messenger? Because MSN back then didn't just do IM. It first established the MSN portal website and outsourced a lot of page content. It wanted to be MSN to be a portal including Taobao, Shanghai Media Group, CCID Net, Renlaikawang, English Village, Mop, Our Game, etc. 9 large websites at the time jointly settled on the MSN portal website. They were going to wage an all-out war against Tencent, known as the Anti-QQ Alliance. At that time, Chuan Luo also took on SP services, which foreign capital had never done before. SP is a telecom value-added service, and they could access it, which was very difficult before.
They didn't even have that authority.
Everyone didn't realize that foreign capital could do this. So, the path taken back then was really wild. Everyone felt that foreign companies entering China were doing it in one go. In addition, Microsoft at that time had another very good card. It reached a cooperation with Yahoo to do something that is hard to imagine today: global interoperability. They told such a story. Yahoo Messenger was Yahoo's own IM at the time. Yahoo Messenger and MSN Messenger could link up and directly send messages to each other. This was the story they told. In the future, all IMs should be able to send messages to each other.
There was even this design phase, such a grand idea at that stage.
And after they made the two sides interoperable, their combined market share was 44% globally, instantly giving them an advantage over QQ. QQ was very nervous then. At that time, Chuan Luo even approached Pony Ma, saying, "Let's cooperate too, let's interoperate." Pony Ma, of course, refused. This interoperability posed a huge risk for a commercial company. For users, of course, the experience would be better. I can send messages to any IM now. But in practice, the one with the higher market share would definitely lose out. Your QQ market share is so high, and in the end, you'd just be funneling traffic to them because they wouldn't need to download QQ to chat with QQ users. You'd have no competitive advantage. Your advantage lies in your scale, and your scale is your advantage. How big was QQ at that time? In the second half of 2005, Pony Ma announced at a press conference that as of the 30th of June 2005, Tencent QQ's registered accounts had reached 440 million, monthly active users exceeded 170 million, and the peak concurrent online users exceeded 16 million. Pony Ma said that China's instant messaging applications had already surpassed the world. The next stage of instant messaging development would also enter a phase of comprehensive socialization, led by China's instant messaging. This was proposed in 2005. Comprehensive socialization, meaning everyone would live on QQ, and QQ would have various services. It's a bit like the box computing concept Robin Lee talked about back then, meaning I don't just provide a single service. My platform provides various services. But you see, MSN was so high and mighty, yet unfortunately, the problems it faced were not as simple as they seemed on the surface. First, as we just mentioned, Beijing and Shanghai had two companies. These two companies had problems because they had two bosses. Minghua Xiong and Chuan Luo were two bosses responsible for different businesses. But were these two at least the same boss? No. These two also had their own separate bosses, and these bosses' opinions were also different. These were the headquarters bosses.
And online, they each had their own bosses.
The bosses at the online headquarters were also different. These two bosses, and the fact that there wasn't a true Greater China regional boss, led to problems.
It again came down to the issue of the chain of command.
It was also a localized Chinese company. Minghua Xiong and Chuan Luo did a lot of work locally, but headquarters support was very limited. First, from Bill Gates' perspective back then, MSN was just a small component. Although he came to China to endorse it, it was just talk. For Microsoft, there were more important battles to fight at the time. MSN China was a very small component within MSN. At that time, it was said that contracts with slightly higher amounts had to go through layers of approval at headquarters. Any contract exceeding $500,000 could not be decided locally in China. Minghua Xiong's R&D team also had a lot of work directed by headquarters, some of which wasn't even for China. It was just used as an R&D center, which was too inefficient. Honestly, if they had just redone many of the things QQ did, MSN would have at least half the market. They just needed to avoid adding those miscellaneous, youth-oriented features. But MSN Messenger had severe feature deficiencies for a long time. For example, offline messages were never done particularly well. It didn't even have it. This feature was proposed in 2005, and it kept getting approved, and couldn't even get into headquarters decision-making meetings. Finally, in 2008, 3 years later, headquarters approved it. The battle was long over. 3 years had passed.
It might still involve something. Don't even mention it, I actually have some impression, I just forgot where I saw it. What was it called? Let's call it software forking, meaning global.
There was only a standalone product version of MSN, right?
So, that's the problem with making such difficult decisions.
You have to do this because headquarters needs to consider the global market. Why spend resources specifically for this market? Again, it's an issue for multinational corporations. QQ Show was similar. MSN had plans, but they couldn't be implemented long-term, which made it very dull. You could say it was the pursuit of business professionals, but not necessarily. However, the next feature was absolutely crucial, the large file transfer function. First, files had very large capacity limits, so many couldn't be sent. I remember later on, many people uploaded files via QQ because QQ supported the transfer of very large files. Another issue was the inability to resume after a disconnection. QQ did very well in this regard. MSN's network was already a bit unstable. If your transfer broke halfway, you'd have to start all over from scratch next time. That was just terrible for everyone. Do that twice, and who would still use you? No one. Although group chat had basic chat functions, other auxiliary features within group chat were rarely added and always severely lacking. That's why the media back then had a summary. Xiaolei, take a look. This is called MSN's Road to Decline.
This is an image. Everyone can see it in the show notes. It covers many points, some key timelines, and within that, some key not timelines, but some of its key features.
Yes, some key features compared to QQ. There were some very small but very important ones. For example, MSN was always in the taskbar, so your boss would know you were chatting at a glance. I won't elaborate on these small features. Everyone understands what they imply just by looking. Additionally, as mentioned earlier, MSN's portal website, the Chinese version, also didn't perform well. The alliance, the anti-QQ alliance I just mentioned, looked good on paper, but in practice, it was far less manageable than the self-operated content of the 4 major portals. For instance, Youthful, the chairman of Our Game at the time, once revealed a statistic. Our Game invested 6 million to become MSN's sole gaming platform partner, but after 1 month of operation, only 20 gaming users were imported from MSN to Our Game. 6 million for 20 people.
That's insane.
After 1 quarter, they quickly stopped the partnership. My money was truly wasted. The efficiency was terrible. By the end of 2005, Microsoft headquarters made a major adjustment. This adjustment was the most significant for MSN. They made a big strategic move, announcing that starting the next year, MSN would no longer exist. All of Microsoft's services would be integrated into a new Windows platform called the Live Platform. The Live Platform aimed to provide users with a one-stop service experience, including email, IM, cloud storage, blogs, security, and so on, all bundled together. MSN Messenger then became Live Messenger. The biggest problem was still that, even if you separated it, it was still an M, but in China, it suffered even more from a lack of local adaptation. It was a global system. Overseas, everyone used Microsoft's email, cloud services, and other things. In China, people only used this one product, and when it was integrated with all these other things, people didn't like using it. The other services were meaningless to them. And you could tell Live Messenger had huge ambitions at the time. It had social media features, a bit like Moments, and also a bit like Weibo. But for users at the time, they just didn't understand it and wouldn't use it.
It definitely has a huge impact. Under what circumstances can this impact be mitigated? Take an Apple phone, for example. You have many services on an Apple phone that you might not use right now, but it doesn't affect the fact that an Apple phone is still more than just a functional device. Its overall system ensures that even if you don't use those additional services, your user stickiness remains very high.
Right, that's one aspect. The key thing is that they completely changed the Messenger feature. That's the most crucial part.
The most core needs could no longer be met.
Each individual product was messed up. You'd look at the interface and just wouldn't know how to use it. It was completely different from QQ.
Honestly, it was indeed a bit too complex. The user experience just didn't match Chinese habits.
Exactly. It didn't align with Chinese user habits, especially. But later, the entire live system didn't really take off overseas either because it tried to do too much. One look and you'd see the interface was cluttered with too many things, mixing in many social media features that people didn't use. Then, in mid-2006, the story I mentioned earlier about Microsoft and Yahoo's interoperability ended their collaboration. That pretty much marked the end of the war. Afterward, MSN continued operating in China, but it abandoned its previous minimalist style, becoming increasingly bloated with more and more ads. Technical support also kept getting worse. By 2008, QQ's market share was already over 80%, dominating the landscape. In 2012, Microsoft completely abandoned MSN, integrating MSN Messenger, or Live Messenger, with Skype, leaving only Skype. Listening to this, you should get a sense of why MSN failed. Pony Ma himself offered an analysis, saying, "It didn't die because we beat it. It died because it didn't keep up with social trends." It was taken down by Facebook. Second, MSN's localization in China wasn't done well. The most fundamental reason is that for us local entrepreneurs, our life and fortune are tied to this product. But for international companies, that's not the case. You see, this is still the most fundamental point. Their motivation and drive were insufficient. My core product isn't here. I'm just throwing some money at it or just doing it casually. But when your life and fortune are at stake, you wouldn't dare act rashly. What was Microsoft China's legacy? Its legacy was Minghua Xiong, the head of Beijing R&D whom I just mentioned. The guy who once smiled dismissively at Tony Zhang. He joined Tencent and became Tencent's CTO, a co-CTO with Tony Zhang. Many friends might not know this story. After their rivalry, there was more mutual respect. Furthermore, Minghua Xiong brought many key figures with him. For example, his former subordinates from MSN, Zhihaozheng and Yu Ying. Both of them were very important generals in Tencent's early days, serving as long-term heads of business groups. As soon as Zhihaozheng arrived at Tencent, he began overseeing product work for QQ Zone. Dao Tong, a Hong Kong native, was the technical lead for QQ Zone at the time. Together, they iterated and launched the new version of QQ Zone, which is when QQ Zone truly took off. Initially, it was treated as just another blog-like product, something to try out casually. But at this point, it started to become popular, so Zhihaozheng is also considered a very important creator of QQ Zone. Although it mimicked blogs, it later incorporated many features like changing skins, photo albums, music players, audio, animations, and various other functions, making its social services much richer than other blogs. In the third quarter of 2006, QQ Zone's registered users surpassed 50 million. With 23 million monthly active users and 13 million daily active users, it was incredibly impressive. This was also the year QQ Zone launched Yellow Diamond, corresponding to QQ Show's Red Diamond, with a monthly fee of 10 yuan, and it grew rapidly. The 2007 financial report showed that with the combined growth of QQ Show, QQ Zone, and QQ membership, Tencent's internet value-added services revenue reached 2.5 billion yuan, a year-on-year increase of 37.7%. Next, Steve Jobs revolutionized the music industry in 2005. We've mentioned before that Apple's music revenue already accounted for over half of its total. Around that time, Tencent also launched its music service, QQ Music, in 2005. In 2006, Green Diamond VIP was introduced for 10 yuan a month. It was also 10 yuan, but QQ Music's growth was relatively slow. At that time, it did have copyright partnerships, but copyright awareness hadn't fully developed. Baidu MP3 was the most popular, where everyone listened to pirated music. Why would I spend 10 yuan to listen to legitimate music when others are listening for free? The first breakthrough actually came through QQ Zone. In 2007, leveraging QQ Zone, if you wanted to set music for your QQ Zone, you had to buy a Green Diamond membership for legitimate copyrights. Many people subscribed specifically so they could play their favorite music for visitors to their space. It wasn't until around 2014, or perhaps traffic to QQ Zone started picking up around 2010, but around 2014, there was a landmark event. Jay Chou released his first digital album on QQ Music. This was a turning point. After this, QQ Music became a very important standalone product. I remember that time quite vividly. Everyone went to buy his digital album. It broke records, reaching hundreds of millions or something like that, with many news reports. That was a crucial moment for the internet music industry, and it had to be Jay Cho. Getting back to QQ Zone, it actually didn't have direct conflicts with other SNS or other social networking sites for a long time. It wasn't considered a direct competitor. However, within QQ Zone, it was also hard for people to compare it to Sinablog and think of it as just another blog product. It was more like a social toy that relied on QQ's social relationships. That might indeed have something to do with its entry point. This relates to all the different features I mentioned earlier. Its focus wasn't on content, it was still primarily on social interaction. Back then, there was a common saying, step on QQ Zone. I'd step on yours, you'd step on mine. It was highly social. It was somewhat similar to Renren.com's personal spaces in that regard, but it didn't directly conflict with those larger social networking sites, allowing it to grow rapidly on its own turf. QQ Zone's real competitor wasn't Sinablog or XiaoyuzhouFM. There was indeed a website that most of us aren't very familiar with today, though a few listeners might know it, 51.com. I hadn't really heard of 51.com, and I don't think I ever used it. This website took a very wild approach to social networking, but it hit its mark precisely. Back then, it focused on what you might call the edge case, or lower-tier market, the towns and rural areas of that era. Initially, it started with a powerful photo-sharing feature that had a very low barrier to entry. They believed most internet users wouldn't write long articles, so simply uploading photos was enough. The barrier was very low. Within 3 months of launch, it had over 5 million registered users and secured over 6 million in investment from Sequoia Capital. Founder Sheng Dongpeng explicitly stated, "At 5.1, we're not learning from Facebook. We need to occupy the counters, which is more important than anything else." What are the counters for internet users? What are the counters for social networks? Internet cafes. So 51 launched an aggressive offline promotion campaign. They went crazy distributing items and putting up posters in internet cafes nationwide, even paying internet cafes to display their posters and collaborate. They handed out mousepads, t-shirts, and heavily promoted 51.com's content, including 51 Show, 51 Groups, 51 Ask, and so on. They fully benchmarked themselves against QQ, creating every product QQ offered. They even enabled direct payments in internet cafes, developing their own payment system just like QCoin. Back then, when users logged into their 51 Management Center page, their personal homepage, they would receive a system prompt that read, "For your convenience and memory, please fill in your homepage address in your QQ profile. This will increase traffic to your homepage." People saw this and thought, that makes sense. So, I'd add a line to my QQ profile, my 51 space. This directly diverted a large number of QQ Zone users to 51.com. How wild was their approach? Many friends have probably heard of the Rainbow QQ plugin. I used Rainbow QQ myself. 51 directly invested in Rainbow QQ and renamed it 51 Rainbow. For a while, QQ Zone was under immense pressure. Xiaoyuzhou led many offline promotions and marketing activities, studying internet cafe scenarios to figure out how to compete with 51. We're not familiar with this, let's learn from them, was the attitude. Then, as mentioned earlier, the god of counters, Xiaoyuzhou, entered the game. He acquired a 25% stake in 51 for 1 million USD and was preparing for an IPO. With such a high valuation, 51 had already been elevated to the top position among Chinese social networks at that time. They aimed for what they called de-low-endization. Once they started de-low-endizing, they began doing things they weren't good at. Many things they couldn't handle. They truly couldn't manage these things. In 2009, Tencent filed a lawsuit, and the Wuhan court in Hubei ruled that 51 had infringed and ordered compensation. This was due to the 51 Rainbow incident. Gradually, due to various factors, the IPO later failed, and other competitors emerged. 51 declined. This was a very interesting little competitive episode, a snippet from the history of competition. Speaking of Rainbow QQ, I should also mention a very similar product from that time, a QQ plugin I use the most, Coral QQ. Its main feature back then and now, I wonder why it was so popular, was displaying IP addresses. Displaying IP addresses was Coral QQ's most prominent feature. You could see where the other person was located.
When you mentioned Rainbow QQ, I was trying to remember. Yeah, there were many plugins, but what did they do? I couldn't recall for the longest time.
Its main feature was displaying IP addresses so you could see where the other person was. Later, it also successively offered features like ad blocking, skin customization, multi-account login, and so on. Different people had different needs, and it was very convenient. QQ appeared very early, as far back as 2001, even with the earliest versions of QQ. But it was obvious that later on, Tencent would severely crack down on such behavior. While displaying IP addresses might have been somewhat acceptable, blocking ads was a death blow that was the foundation of their commercialization. So, in 2007, Tencent sued, and the author, Shoufu Chen, was sentenced to 3 years in prison and fined 1.2 million. This was the famous ruling by the Nanshan District Court. This incident caused a lot of controversy at the time, with many feeling that Tencent was bullying a smaller entity. People thought he was just an enthusiast doing some work out of passion, and you sent him to prison for 3 years? But essentially after that, QQ plugins became increasingly rare. There was another well-known plugin back then called QQ. I didn't use it much, but I've seen many people mention it. I don't have a strong impression of it. Speaking of plugins, I looked it up and it's quite interesting. QQ's official team, and this is really excessive, also released its own plugin called QQ Clairvoyance. How excessive was it? You could pay money to see invisible users? That's just too much. You release a feature yourself, and then you let your users cheat by paying for it. Of course, this was quickly taken down due to controversy. I don't know which Tencent team was behind it. Getting back to QQ Zone, a very important milestone later on was in 2009, when Happy Farm was introduced. Happy Farm first became popular on Xiaoyuzhou.com, but it wasn't developed by Xiaoyuzhou.com officially. It was created by a third party after Xiaoyuzhou.com opened its third-party API. So, Tencent was also able to negotiate with that third party, and after some discussions, successfully introduced Happy Farm to QQ Zone. Happy Farm became an instant hit on QQ Zone. This was extremely important for QQ Zone's activity. It was later renamed QQ Farm. It's hard to imagine, but in just 1 quarter it brought over 70 million new active users to QQ Zone, with nearly 100 million users playing the farm game.
For QQ Zone, with such a massive user base, to still grow that much in a single quarter.
They might not have had much use for QQ Zone itself, just purely playing games like Farm and later Parking Space. These were some of QQ Zone's most important features in games back then.
Back then, I remember playing these on school day. I used school day more often.
We used QQ Zone less.
By that time, we were already past that age. Because I used QQ Zone the most from high school graduation until before college.
But the peak popularity of QQ Zone was actually among the generations after us. Many post-90s used it a lot. We didn't catch that era. Going back to Minghua Xiong, whom we mentioned earlier, he brought his subordinate, Zheng, the product manager for QQ Zone, from Microsoft China to Tencent. Zheng's career has also been very successful. He is currently the CEO of Maoyan. You can see Zheng's name in the opening credits of many movies. To summarize, I feel that early Tencent was a bit like Baidu. You see, they are similar in many ways. For example, just having QQ definitely isn't enough. Just like Baidu only having search definitely isn't enough. Baidu previously had Tiba, Baike, and Jidao. It had richer content. When people searched, they could find more content, which was crucial. Tencent also didn't just have QQ, it had QQ Show, QQ Zone, QQ Member, and a series of value-added services which created stronger barriers. And throughout this process, it wasn't just as simple as people imagined that they entered early, made a product, and then it became popular because of many users. There were many competitors in the early days. Baidu Search would face a new wave of competitors every few years, and QQ also faced new competitors every few years. It's still that saying, one attains enlightenment and passes like the wind. Another achieves greatness, leaving millennia to weep. So, it was forged in a bloodbath. Another interesting point, very similar to Baidu, is that they both fought against giants like Google and Microsoft. On one hand, they had a stronger foundation and did better localization. On the other hand, the opponent's localization wasn't very good. Their scripts were pretty similar. In this regard, didn't Google also withdraw from China for the same reason back then? So, Tencent, sweeping past all obstacles, also went further and further down the path of diversification. Another major business was about to rise. We come to the third chapter. Public enemy stirs up trouble. What business? Of course it's the gaming business. Tencent started making games very early. Guess when Tencent started making games?
Just now, in 2005, when he analyzed the market, he already factored in 7 billion for games. I'd guess it was 2004.
In March 2003, early that year, Tencent arranged for Stephen Ren to take some employees to Shanghai. They established the Game Operations Department in the Lujiazui Telecom building. This was Tencent Shanghai with over 30 employees at the time. Why do this? Because back then, Legend and Fantasy Westward Journey were hugely popular. Everyone wanted a piece of that. William Ding also started experimenting around 2002 to 2003, didn't he? Ponyma must have thought at the time, William Ding and I are similar. If he can do it, I definitely can too. Ponyma himself, when it came to games, he was very eager to push for a trial. However, Li Qingzheng and Tony Zhang's opinions were rather ambiguous. They felt it wasn't their particular strength, but if he wanted to try, he should go for it. Their opinions diverged somewhat, but they eventually started the trial. With just over 30 people, they certainly couldn't develop a large-scale game, especially not one built from scratch. So, Tencent's game department introduced a Korean game, a 3D online game called Kaishuan, as an agent. In April 2003, Tencent announced an internal test for May 20th. At the time, it was a huge fanfare. Tencent is making games. Everyone come try it. Over 200,000 people registered in advance. Then on May 16th, they suddenly announced a delay in the internal test because they had underestimated the difficulty of making games, even agented ones. It wasn't that easy. When was it finally released? Announced in April, it finally went public on August 1st. After the public launch, the servers crashed within 12 hours. It was unplayable. The technical support was that bad. A Shanda spokesperson, when interviewed by the media at the time, said, "We respect Tencent's entry into the online gaming field, but Tencent should also respect online gaming." This attempt quickly ended like a farce. Kaishuan didn't gain any traction, and they gradually abandoned this path. But it wasn't a complete waste. Stephen Wren came back and thought, Tencent doesn't have experience making large-scale games, but can we make some simple games with social attributes? After all, we're in the social business, aren't we? You should connect this to what we mentioned earlier. Tencent wanted to make quirky games. These quirky games had a very clear inspiration, our game. I just mentioned it. Youthful founded our game even before Tencent. By the end of 2003, our game's registered users had exceeded 200 million, with 15 million monthly active users. It was a huge market. The quirky game market, it held over 80% of the market share.
Indeed. Back in those days, if you experienced that era, just think back.
When QQ first launched its peculiar games, or rather, the QQ Game Hall, Youthful paid some attention, but didn't take it too seriously. He tried it out and felt there weren't many games, and they weren't very well made. But QQ's power was simply terrifying. Just like we mentioned before, QQ Club and QQ Member only did one thing, the red name display, and it was a hit. At that time, QQ did just one thing that effectively killed our game. What was it? They added a display window to the QQ friends list that showed, your friend is playing what? It was just that one thing. Think about it. It's perfectly logical. What are they playing? Let me click and check it out. And boom, you're in. Playing. Eventually, everyone was swept over. Just this small feature. Imagine the immense power of over 200 million registered QQ users at that time. Media investigations back then even found that QQ Game Hall was so similar to our Game Hall that many users they surveyed couldn't distinguish them, thinking they were still playing our game. Wait, this isn't our game? It's QQ? Well, close enough. I'll play anyway.
Yeah, same thing, I'll play.
There's another point that might surprise everyone. Our Game Hall, in its pursuit of commercialization, charged for many of its games. But QQ Game was completely free. It was a case of a side business attacking your main business, following the logic we discussed earlier. How could you compete when their cash flow was so abundant? Look at the timing. QQ Game started in 2004. By the end of 2004, Yue Qiaobao, the founder of our game, resigned, or rather, was forced to leave. He wasn't just resigned, the board of directors removed him. Our game rapidly declined. In just over a year, our game, a platform with 200 million users, was essentially wiped out. Our game still exists today, and people can still play it. It's a living fossil now. This is quite a poignant story. Our game was defeated, but Tencent's appetite wasn't satisfied. Next, they went after the gaming hegemon, Shanda. Back then, there was a Famicom game we briefly mentioned when discussing Nintendo called Bomberman. A Korean company developed BNB, imitating Bomberman on the Famicom. This game was a casual online game where everyone placed bombs to blow up others. It was a very simple game with a low barrier to entry and quite casual to play. Shanda acquired the agency rights in 2002, and by 2004, its concurrent online users exceeded 700,000. It was one of the games with the most active users globally. roughly on the same level as Legend of Mir. Its name was Popo Tang. Tencent, on its part, invested almost all its resources. Its game development started truly from scratch, paying homage to it with QQ Tang. It began internal testing in September 2004 and public beta in December. They also made some innovations in character design. Within 3 months, concurrent online users reached 100,000. By 2006, it directly impacted Popo Tang's activity. Shanda's financial report showed that Popo Tang's revenue dropped by 18% in 1 quarter. At that time, Tian Qiaochen didn't file a direct lawsuit. Instead, he found the original Korean company and had them file a lawsuit in Beijing. This lawsuit was very famous. It was China's first cross-border copyright case for online games. The final verdict surprised many. Tencent was not found to be infringing, and there was no appeal. You can look up the details, but it's generally hard to prove copyright infringement, as gameplay mechanics are not protected. So, the Korean company's complaint was actually about copyright infringement, claiming Tencent copied their map interfaces and such. But with such map interfaces, if you just make a few changes, it's hard to argue it's a direct copy-paste. That makes it very difficult to successfully defend rights or get a ruling. That was QQ Tang. Next, in June 2005, Tencent launched QQ Pet. Actually, QQ Pet was initially developed by the B2 department, which was the department responsible for QQ itself. Later, because it grew bigger and became more like a game, QQ Pet was transferred to the nurturing department, handled by the game department. A year later, QQ Pet's concurrent online users reached 1 million, making it the world's largest virtual pet community. At that time, they also launched Pink Diamond VIP. For 10 RMB a month, you could have many different features. There were many extended gameplay options then, like QQ Pet Inn, QQ Pet Hospital. QQ Pet could do all sorts of things, offering a complete life cycle to take care of your pet. Xiaolei, take a look. How many functions would pop up when you clicked on QQ Pet back then?
Feeding pets, learning to feed, bathing, taking medicine, seeing a doctor, working, pet community, pet entertainment, toy alley, pet performances, uninstall tool, QQ assistant, sending pet shows, group message reminders, pet status pause growth, hide pet outfit.
And that's just a part of it. You could play with your QQ Pet in the hospital, at an inn, or at home. There were so many things you could do. I remember playing it back then because, for our generation, when I first started using computers, I had a pretty deep impression of Rising's Little Lion. The previous part was teasing it a bit. Yes, this was imitating Rising's Little Lion. And inside, when you saw the penguin get hungry, it was so cute, wanting food. The whole thing, including it being built into QQ and the massive user base, meant it instantly became, well, I wouldn't say a huge hit, but it was very popular. Later, the penguin turned into a chick, and many friends actually had a lot of affection for it. QQ Pet continued until 2018 when it was finally shut down. At that time, there were many discussions online, and many friends posted pictures. These pictures looked quite sad, mourning their pets. It was like the pet was saying, "Master, goodbye forever." In this picture, the little penguin is lying on the ground, perhaps already gone, eyes closed. Above it, the message reads, "Master, goodbye forever." Besides these attempts at casual games, QQ also didn't give up on large-scale games. In March 2005, QQ Fantasy began its internal testing, officially launching at the end of the year. You see, this was another homage to Fantasy Westward Journey. Although QQ Fantasy was quite well made, it didn't launch at the right time. Right after its launch, 3 of Shanda's games became free. QQ Fantasy was caught off guard and quickly declined. It also used game cards, but the era of free-to-play had arrived. It didn't have the massive player base like Fantasy Westward Journey. When players saw free games available, they wouldn't want to play paid games, making it very difficult for QQ Fantasy to attract new users. Stephen Wren later realized that they were better at casual games, so they continued with the QQ Tang strategy. In 2006, they introduced a music rhythm game developed in Korea, originally called R2 Beat, which they renamed QQ Speed. This was also a game I played. At the time, its concurrent online users weren't particularly high, reaching 70,000. Following that, QQ Speed, the racing game, and QQ Dance were all self-developed games. However, these models were indeed pre-existing, either from Nintendo games or other online games already on the market, which they borrowed from. Their registered user numbers also exceeded 1 million. By this stage, Tencent as a whole had found the right gaming direction for the QQ ecosystem. You see, from Stephen Wren leading the team in Shanghai, looking completely bewildered, to becoming Tencent's largest cash flow department, surpassing even value-added services. It only took 3 years. By 2006, gaming revenue had already surpassed other income streams. Gaming revenue was truly impressive. In 2008, Tencent introduced 2 major games from Korea that truly achieved phenomenal popularity, leading everyone to finally consider Tencent a gaming company. These 2 games were Crossfire, a first-person shooter similar to CS, and Dungeon Fighter Online, a side-scrolling arcade-style game. By the end of 2008, their concurrent online users reached 2.2 million and 1.5 million respectively. Before this, basically 100,000 or a few 100,000 concurrent users was considered good. Now, they were reaching millions, completely crushing all previous games. What does this mean? 2008 was a very important turning point for Tencent. In 2008, Shanda's full-year gaming revenue was 3.4 billion, making it number 1 in China. In the same year, Tencent Games' revenue was 2.8 billion, making it number 2 in China. That year, it was already a bigger gaming company than NetEase.
Shanda's words about Tencent needing to respect games still echo in our ears.
Tencent itself considered this year the founding year for its gaming division. Also in this year, Tencent laid another very important groundwork in gaming, securing the agency rights for a new competitive game that imitated Dota. The development company was called Riot, and the game was League of Legends. A few years later, Tencent directly acquired a majority stake in Riot Games, gaining control of League of Legends. This started in 2008. By 2013, League of Legends concurrent online users exceeded 5 million, making it the world's largest online game. In the first quarter of that year, Tencent Games' revenue was $1.2 billion. Following Tencent, the combined revenue of NetEase, Shanda, Chengyu, Perfect World, and Giant 5 companies was $870 million. Tencent alone made $1.2 billion. This was a generational gap, truly terrifying. From 2008 until today, Tencent has been a gaming giant. Today, we all know it's the world's largest gaming company, bar none, and that started in 2008. Next, let's talk about the turning point. By the second quarter of 2009, Tencent Games was already number 1 in China for gaming revenue, and investor confidence was soaring. The preceding years were Baidu's most glorious period, as we discussed. 2010, however, was Tencent's most glorious time. Its market value surpassed 250 billion Hong Kong dollars. QQ's concurrent online users exceeded 100 million. It had previously been in the tens of millions. This milestone of over 100 million concurrent users was reached in July 2006. When QQ's concurrent online users exceeded 20 million, co-CTO Minghua Xiong asked Pony Ma, Mr. Ma, "When do you estimate our online user count will reach over 100 million? Pony Ma replied, "I probably won't see that in my lifetime." This was only 3 years before it actually happened, far exceeding their initial expectations. The years around 2010 were also very important for Tencent. This was when the second generation of internet companies laid their foundations. BAT replaced NSS, as we've mentioned before. Tencent, Baidu, and Alibaba had ascended to the throne, and the previous internet companies were beginning to fade. Around 2010, Pony Ma had a saying. He believed China's second internet land grab was about to end. The first was the portal websites. After the land grab, you had the users. So what next? You had to cultivate the land you'd acquired. How to cultivate it became the next strategic focus. Tencent had to plan and build on the land it had claimed, initiating deeper competition. This sounds abstract, but it was a strategic direction. One approach is to continue grabbing land, assuming there are still many potential users and new things to acquire. The other is to provide these users with more services on your platform, encouraging them to spend more money. When he said this, Tencent was already a behemoth. Unlike Baidu, which focused on information services, or Alibaba, which focused on e-commerce, Tencent at this time wasn't just doing social networking. And in doing so, it killed many companies. To put it this way, if you go for investment today, investors might ask, what if a big tech company copies you? What if ByteDance or Alibaba does it? Back then, the standard question was, what if Tencent copies you? You won't survive. Tencent copies everything was a common saying back then, and the number of people criticizing Tencent grew. The earliest criticism from internet moguls came from Jidong Wang, the founder of Sifang and Sina.com. Jidong Wang said that Pony Ma was a notorious copycat king in the industry, openly and brazenly copying others. Jack Ma also expressed that Pony Ma's PaiPai.com copied Taobao. We mentioned before that Robin Li also said So copied Baidu. William Ding, A friend who used to chat and laugh with him also said Pony Ma copies everything. Okay, that initial quote is here. In August 2008, Guangzhou's Yangcheng Evening News, in an article titled Decoding Tencent, Where Lies Pony Ma's Cunning, wrote, "When outsiders evaluate Tencent, they inevitably add the phrase, the victory of imitation. Tencent imitates ceaselessly. It has tasted the sweetness of it and become unstoppable." At that time, people slowly began to have many negative impressions of Tencent. For example, the company behind QQ Farm, the company that made Happy Farm, was founded by university students. Tencent earned a lot of money from this and only paid a one-time fee. This was negotiated beforehand. Of course, you could say they lacked foresight, only asking for a one-time fee during negotiations. This company had a very tough time, almost going out of business. In 2012, the company closed down. So, a company that created Happy Farm ended up like this. Tencent itself made a fortune. From a public perception standpoint, people felt, morally, you should have helped them out, but they didn't. Additionally, Youthful, CEO of UC Browser, told the media that if users logged into QQ Farm using UC, their user level would decrease. Why? Because at that time, you had to use QQ Browser to play QQ Farm normally. Isn't this just using a monopolistic position to disgust others? This is a bit too much. Finally, amidst various media reports, what I just mentioned were just small cases. Many such small cases, the ultimate explosion was related to a famous report. On the 24th of July 2010, the well-known newspaper Computer World, which had previously published Pony Ma's article about FidoNet, Pony Ma had a pretty good relationship with them before, published an article titled Fuck Tencent. A mainstream internet media magazine using profanity on its cover to report on Tencent, how much hatred must there have been?
Just imagine the depth of emotion contained within that.
The cover showed a cute penguin wearing a scarf, Tencent's penguin, with 3 knives stuck in its body, blood streaming down. Take a look at this image.
The image editing skills weren't that great, but that's not important. This picture is just a small embellishment. The 3 words fuck Tencent in quotes, that's the main point.
This is truly hard to imagine. After all, Computer World is a very important mainstream media outlet. This article detailed how Tencent became the internet's villain and why everyone hated it. Let's quote some parts. For example, it says, Tencent's QQ group buy website launched. QQ had also done group buying before, doing everything. It said, Meituan CEO Xing Wang felt like he'd heard thunder, was sitting on pins and needles, had a blind spot on his back, and a lump in his throat. Tencent's minigame platform, 3366.com, launched its open beta. In terms of game types and website design, it was indistinguishable from another minigame platform on the market, 4399.com. 4399 was preparing for a domestic A-share IPO, and Tencent's entry would permanently derail this plan. How tragic. Next, regarding Tencent's QQ group buy. After Yu Qiaobao, who was utterly defeated in the card game war, left our game, he became an angel investor. He told reporters that one of his investment principles now is to only invest in projects that don't compete with Tencent. While major video sites were fighting fiercely over copyrights, frequently going to court, a similar sentiment circulated in the industry. No matter how much fun you're having fighting now, once the market is mature enough, it will be Tencent's turn to take over. Sinus editor-in-chief Tong Chen once said, a certain website is insatiably greedy. There's no field it won't meddle in, no product it doesn't want to make. If this continues, things will turn against it. Becoming an enemy of the entire internet will lead to its demise. The fact that Tong Chen could say this directly.
You see, everyone, recall what we talked about an hour ago. The general expectation was that if you do everything, you'll likely do nothing well and eventually destroy yourself. Now, even if you do many things well, it's just a different reason. People will still criticize you. It really did step on too many people's toes.
These are direct competitors. Beyond that, he certainly also felt there were areas where Tencent was strong. In this article, the author concluded that Tencent never tries something new, but always finds a way to muscle in on mature markets. However, the path it chose made it highly controversial. Imitation, sometimes even unscrupulous copycatting. From imitating ICQ to launching its first product, OICQ, everything was a copycat. This is the fundamental reason why Tencent was hated. Relatively speaking, I think the author, apart from the extremely provocative title, what he wrote inside was, how should I put it? Expressing through some information that criticizing Tencent was something everyone in the industry was doing. He was describing such a phenomenon, which is why he put fuck Tencent in quotes. Once the article was published, it was huge, spreading like wildfire across the country. Even before the newspaper was printed, major portals actively reposted it, placing it in the most prominent spots. When Tencent saw this, and after the overwhelming criticism emerged, the president's office held a meeting. In that meeting, everyone was silent. Only Pony Ma was heard quietly saying one sentence, "How can they curse people?" He didn't realize it. According to my analysis, he probably genuinely didn't realize he would be cursed so badly.
Before this, the general sentiment was definitely like this, but something this harsh was probably the first time.
Anyway, they acted quite aggrieved. At the time, Tencent issued a statement reserving the right to sue. This incident caused a huge stir. Under pressure, the author's editor-in-chief, and the entire editorial team all resigned. They all left. They all resigned under Tencent's pressure.
This matter really seems quite unusual.
Because it was foul language. Even if the content was a bit extreme, putting it on the title and cover like that was a bit much. A month later, at the internet conference, Tencent had numerous deep collaborations, reportedly spending over $1 million yuan. Tencent, QQ, and related products were everywhere at the exhibition booths. This directly caused Sina and Sohu to refuse to report on it, effectively cutting ties with the internet conference. All major portal websites stopped covering it. Guo Weikao, Charles Zhang, Jack Ma, and Tian Qiao Chen, all of whom attended the internet conference every year, were absent. It was like, you're so amazing, go host it yourself. The internet is your personal domain, isn't it? That's how intense the situation was back then. Pony Ma and Tencent went through such a period. Years later, Jack Ma even made a joke about Pony Ma. Let's go straight to Mr. Ma's original audio.
Maintain curiosity about the future and maintain reverence for the innovators of yesterday. I believe that for us young people, we live in a great era. And this great era absolutely does not mean fleeing at the sound of Wen, that Wen being Tencent's son. It absolutely doesn't mean that just because there's Taobao's Taobao, yes, the one called Taobao's WeChat, why does it have to be Tencent?
That Taobao part later, who said that? Pony Ma did.
It's quite interesting. Back then, Jack Ma, right in front of Pony Ma, said that young people shouldn't flee at the sound of Wen, and just because Tencent does something doesn't mean we can't do it. Then Pony Ma reacted incredibly fast. Fleeing at the sound of Wen, is that Wen or Tao? He immediately turned the tables.
But Jack Ma's reaction afterward was quite interesting. He slapped the sofa, as if thinking, why did I say that? It was like he immediately tried to downplay it right there. He had just said it as a joke, after all.
From Jack Ma's statement, you can also sense that back then, people still felt there was this phenomenon of fleeing at the sound of Wen. At least to circle back, at that time, people mostly engaged in what you might call non-violent non-cooperation, which meant just complaining or cursing a bit in certain settings. There was no real intention of a direct, face-to-face confrontation. We also need to talk about an internet battle hero, Mr. Xiaoyuzhou. He's making another appearance about to take the stage. I feel like after discussing all these internet companies, Mr. Xiaoyuzhou's life story is really coming together. No need to elaborate. Starting in 2007, Xiaoyuzhou left Yahoo China and entered the antivirus market. He truly stirred things up there. In 2008, after he announced permanent free service, it caught all the companies in the antivirus market completely off guard. Later, he launched 360 browser in 2009. And you have to remember, he left Yahoo China, and in just a few years, he built this from scratch. Furthermore, Mr. Xiaoyuzhou had just finished a battle, primarily a competitive struggle in the antivirus market with Kingsoft. Xiaoyuzhou was even almost pursued across provinces by the Liaoning police. We'll delve into that anecdote when we talk about Xiaoyuzhou again later. How the Liaoning police directly went to his company to arrest people. A friend told him, the police are here, and Xiaoyuzhou hid in Hong Kong for a while. He really did run. Later, the Liaoning police were even summoned for a talk by higher authorities. Anyway, it was all very much like a spy movie. But Xiaoyuzhou truly never stopped fighting. Actually, originally, Xiaoyuzhou wanted to get his revenge first. Because from his perspective, Baidu was the one who defeated him back then. Didn't he go up against Baidu when he was at Yahoo China? He wanted revenge. And initially, his attitude towards Pony Ma was very good. Everyone else skipped the internet conference, but he went. After he went, he even sent a text message to Pony Ma saying, how about this? Tencent. You invest, we'll develop products, and we'll go after Baidu. Let's take down their medical ads, completely eliminate their medical business, and cut 30% of their revenue. He even considered collaborating. Pony Ma refused. Not only did he refuse, but not long after, Tencent launched QQ PC Manager. At that point, Xiaoyuzhou was furious. Speaking of which, Before QQ PC Manager, Tencent already had similar products called QQ Doctor and QQ Software Manager. So, weren't they already in the game? But it's very different. Very different. It exclusively targeted QQ accounts. And QQ Software Manager is also straightforward. It simply managed software. It had nothing to do with security. However, QQ PC Manager, after merging these two, completely replicated the functions of 360 Security Guard. These features were essentially identical. Xiaoyuzhou even said later, look at their user manuals. Some haven't even been updated, and they still mention 360 inside. To that extent, after several iterations, QQ PC Manager was basically aiming to eliminate 360. Because it leveraged QQ, for Xiaoyuzhou, this was nothing short of a dimensionality reduction strike. This is my lifeline. As I said before, this is my life. You can treat it as a side project, but for me, it's a matter of survival. When QQ PC Manager was first launched, Xiaoyuzhou's initial attitude was quite reasonable. He didn't immediately jump into a fight, as many might imagine. He first called Pony Ma and said, "Can we discuss something? Just one thing, please don't bundle it." When users install QQ, don't automatically check the box to install QQ PC Manager. He had humbled himself to that extent. But Pony Ma said no. Firstly, Tencent won't try to destroy 360, but the market is for everyone, and Tencent's security business is something we must pursue. With that said, when QQ was installed, imagine, it was bundled. It was covert at the time, somewhat resembling 360's rogue tactics. It would silently install itself in the background. The crucial point is that one mountain cannot hold two tigers. Tencent PC Manager would uninstall 360. It was incompatible with 360 Security Guard. Once installed, it would effectively remove 360. This bundling phenomenon was also very common in the PC era, and users generally didn't perceive it as a major issue, especially those who weren't very tech-savvy.
Mainly, he couldn't figure it out. He didn't know how it got installed, and once it was there, he just used it.
You'd install one piece of software, and suddenly 10 icons would pop up on your desktop. That was a common sight back then. So, looking back, modern mobile operating systems, especially Apple's iOS, have fundamentally solved this issue. At least, you won't see that happening anymore. It's been so long since that era that I genuinely don't even remember that kind of thing. You know, Xiaoyuzhou saw this and thought, Pony, if you're doing this, then I'll put Lee's side on hold and deal with you first.
Began to turn the tide.
After the Mid-Autumn Festival, 360 suddenly launched the 360 Privacy Protector. And they launched a major special page on their official website titled User Privacy Above All Else. This page featured various articles like QQ has long spied on user privacy, QQ infringes on user privacy, QQ admits to spying on user privacy, the purpose of QQ spying, please choose QQ carefully, and multiple software expose QQ's spying, all articles collected from various media outlets. 360 officially stated that after QQ runs for a few minutes, it accesses thousands of files on the user's hard drive, including many files completely unrelated to chat services, such as user pictures, documents, and online banking data. Look, it scans all of this when it runs. This was 360's official statement. What did the 360 Privacy Protector do? It had one function. After you installed it, it would pop up a notification after scanning your hard drive, telling you how many of your files QQ had accessed and how many of those involved private information. When people saw this, they felt that QQ was indeed doing something very real with the data laid out, giving them a tangible sense of it. And Xiaoyuzhou's timing was truly brilliant, as if he had studied military strategy. He chose the last day before the National Day holiday. After he released it, the issue had already fermented during the holiday. Executives were still on vacation. By the time they returned, the issue had escalated significantly, leaving no time to react. Everyone held emergency meetings. It wasn't until October 11th, several days after the National Day holiday, that Tencent issued a pop-up announcement to all QQ users. A pop-up announcement already indicated a very urgent situation. It was a solemn declaration stating that there were no privacy leaks. On the 14th, Tencent officially sued 360 and the war of words began between the two sides. At that time, Tencent also found 360's rivals, some companies that were also sworn enemies of 360, such as Kingsoft, Kaspersky, and Baidu. They joined Tencent in issuing a statement, claiming that 360 also had its own problems, using the guise of security to intimidate users and seek improper commercial gains. 360 also started issuing pop-ups, declaring war on all gray interests and unspoken rules. They weren't afraid of offending any company, even China's largest and second largest internet giants, positioning themselves as dragon-slaying heroes. And later, 360's pop-ups became increasingly outlandish. There was even an article, Friends, Pony Ma received economic subsidies from Shenzhen. Of course, other media later reported that it was a subsidy for high-level talent, not an economic subsidy for users, which was reasonable. Yes, but the purpose wasn't to spy. There was indeed a suspicion of privacy infringement, but not to view user files or spy, because they needed to check for Trojan horse tools. Some Trojan horse tools were hidden on hard drives, and account theft was rampant at the time. But Tencent explained at the time, "We're just like the police or customs, we do an X-ray scan." That's what they said. But even with that explanation, users generally found it hard to accept. After all, they had still looked, essentially confirming that they had the ability to see your data. And Tencent was already a business empire at that time, and QQ was a national-level application, so people were genuinely worried. While they were still arguing, on October 29th, 360 released Coco Guard. Co is a homophone for QQ. What did it claim to do? It claimed to fully protect QQ users' security, including preventing privacy leaks, preventing Trojans from stealing QQ accounts, and speeding up QQ. It sounded better, right? Speeding up QQ meant deleting ads. It would delete all your ads and remove all those extra features. If a user installed QQ Guard, there would be a repair option. If you checked Repair All with one click, what would it do? First, it would delete the QQ Security Center and replace it with the 360 Security Center. At the same time, it would shut down QQ Show, turn off QQ software ads, disable QQ mini homepage pop-ups, turn off QQ News, and remove all commercial exposure. It would delete everything.
Even if it was just about commercial exposure, they even shut down QQ Show.
One-click deletion of all sorts of junk, in quotes. QQ Video, QQ Music, all bundled QQ products, all deleted. For Tencent, this was just, oh dear.
It's like someone showing up at your doorstep with a hoe, digging up your entire yard right from the entrance, and then carrying off your front door.
If it were just about these bundled products, that would be one thing. But Tencent discovered that 360 had also backed up all of QQ's friend relationship chains. Oh my, they can do that too! Although they hadn't used it yet, in the future, 360 might say, just move over here, all your friends are already here. Wouldn't that be pulling the rug out from under them? It was terrifying.
This was very serious.
For users, it actually didn't matter. They were even quite happy. No more ads, and it even sped things up. The reason for the speed up, of course, was that it deleted a lot of stuff. But for Tencent, this was truly life-threatening. You want my life, I want yours too. Bring it on. And October 29th was a crucial date. It was Pony Ma's 39th birthday. A real psychological blow. What 360 did, when you think about it, was truly something that could only happen in the PC era. One piece of software having such immense power to delete things from your computer. That's why today's isolation between apps is inherently safer for businesses, relatively speaking. At least, Xiaolei, take a look at the QQ Guard interface from back then.
What everyone is quite familiar with is actually the overall interface layout similar to 360 Security Guard, except this was specifically made as a standalone 360 QQ Guard. On it, there were options to check QQ health, speed up QQ, and clean QQ junk.
This clean junk meant deleting all those things.
Remove QQ ads, kill QQ Trojans, protect QQ security. And finally, privacy protection. I guess initially, the privacy protection feature would just direct you straight to 360 Security Guard.
At that point, Tencent also collapsed. They immediately reported it to the Public Security Bureau and filed a complaint with the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, essentially telling on them to the authorities. The leaders at the Public Security Bureau and the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology were very proactive, but completely bewildered. They had no idea what was going on. By November 1st, Tencent's internal statistics showed that over 20 million QQ users had installed 360 QQ Guard. After urgent discussions, on November 3rd, Pony Ma decided to stop QQ from running on any computer that had any 360 software installed. A pop-up appeared on QQ. At that time, all QQ users received a pop-up. I remember when I was using QQ, a window popped up. A letter to QQ users. The pop-up said, "When you see this letter, we have just made a very hard decision." This hard decision became a meme for many years. This hard decision was that if you had 360 installed, you couldn't use QQ. It was a choose one situation, the most severe choose one in the history of China's internet. It was a ruthless move. This choose one was different from the choose one situations with Taobao and JD. Didn't they have choose one for merchants before? At least that didn't affect as wide a range of merchants. This was for all users, and the user overlap was extremely high. 360 was a national application, and QQ was also a national application. For users, this was very shocking. Why? Why did I have to delete one software just to accommodate another?
Indeed, for QQ, that was an absolute killer move. Never mind how big the side effects were.
Yes, the side effects were indeed huge. At that time, everyone was mainly criticizing Tencent because Tencent initiated the choose one policy, which was truly disgusting. Weren't they just coercing users? In the end, everyone would definitely choose QQ. Later, Ponyma also explained that 360's installation base had reached between 120 million and 150 million, with a 60% overlap with their computer installations. It was estimated that about 100 million QQ users were affected by this overlap. 360 QQ Guard was released on Friday after 11 a.m. By Monday, over 20 million users were infected. That was his word choice, infected. By Tuesday, we saw it was inducing users to generate and spread images. It had a very convenient sharing function. Assuming each QQ user had 40 friends, 20 million users could quickly expand to 800 million. The situation was already extremely critical. Besides confrontation and going offline, we had no other option. That's what he said at the time, and he had his reasons. He needed to save himself and rationalize it. Xiaoyuzhou, on his side, announced, "No worries, friends. You can use WebQQ. We've developed it. Download our modified web version." Because Tencent had an open interface, so you can use QQ with our new client, and that solves the problem. Tencent immediately closed the WebQQ web-based access point as well. Later, 360 released an urgent appeal to netizens, imploring users to stand firm and not use QQ for 3 days to discuss them. It contained this passage. Today, Tencent has resorted to the cruelest means, attempting to strangle 360. Tencent is China's largest internet company, with a market value of over 300 billion and 7 billion in cash, while 360 is a startup with only a few hundred people, full of passion and dreams. The disparity in strength between the two is obvious. When the former king not only betrayed its users but also defected to capital with its arsenal, how shall we defend ourselves? The greatest crime of good people is the forgiveness of crime. Is it true that in the future, China's internet will only allow one Tencent? Will you, your relatives, and our next generation be held hostage by this company? Will justice, sunshine, and security be extinguished?
Oh my goodness, the earliest capitalist narratives were already emerging back then.
All this back and forth, all these things I just mentioned, happening within a single day, it was incredibly intense and dramatic. Internet companies back then just went at it. I won't go into all the details, but the fight continued for many more days. On November 20th, the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology issued a notice, ordering both companies to publicly apologize to the entire society and properly handle user aftermath within 5 working days of the document's release. That pretty much brought it to an end. What was particularly interesting throughout this whole process was how many third parties joined in the fun. For example, Kingsoft, Sogo, and Maxthon browser had a pretty high market share back then. All these software companies declared choose one and opposed 360 because they were all premium products. The funniest part was Renren.com. Renren.com released a software called QQ Peacemaker. You know, with this choose one situation, if you installed their software, you could use both. Renren.com was so mischievous.
How did they manage to make it so you could use both if you installed theirs?
That was a patch, and it could achieve that. Technically, it was certainly feasible. It found a loophole. Because QQ must have installed a plugin to block it, and if it detected 360 running, I clearly had methods to make 360 undetectable. Renren.com used a QQ Peacemaker tool, and later everyone discovered that the QQ Peacemaker contained many Renren.com referral ads. Anyway, back then, they were really aggressive about latching onto hot topics, completely different from today's internet landscape.
They really had to react quickly. Looking at this image provided by Lufei now, QQ Peacemaker patch. Welcome to use QQ Peacemaker patch.
On the left, it showed a handshake with "Harmony is precious" written above it, adding a layer of irony, which was quite amusing. But sometimes, things got really brutal. When Kingsoft announced its Choose One ultimatum with 360 security guard would directly delete all Kingsoft games as if they were viruses. It was absolutely terrifying. At that point, they were essentially fighting blindly.
Every user's computer became their battlefield. It didn't matter if you were just casually using their services or deeply invested, it was all fair game, just fight.
At that point, they truly weren't treating users as users. This whole thing lasted only a month or two. It seemed like a very quick blitzkrieg, coming and going rapidly. But afterward, the ultimate impact was enormous. Although it looked like a complete mess, it surprisingly resulted in a win-win situation. First, 360 quickly gained fame from this battle, becoming the hero fighting the evil dragon. 6 months later, 360 went public with a P/E ratio of 360 times. Yes, 360 with a P/E ratio of 360 times. By 2014, it was China's third most valuable internet company by market capitalization, showing how highly people regarded it, trailing only Tencent and Baidu. Alibaba hadn't gone public yet at that time. Many friends probably don't know this, especially younger ones, that Xiaoyuzhou had such a moment back then. So, for the internet's top-tier giants, on Tencent's side, most of the subsequent lawsuits were completely won by Tencent. This is because many of the things Tencent did were within its own software, whereas 360 directly modified others' software, specifically QQ, which was an intrusive kind of alteration. So, Tencent largely held the legal high ground. However, while they won the lawsuits, Tencent lost in public opinion. This was very painful for Tencent. Pony Ma also began to reflect from this point. This reflection was exactly what he had muttered in the executive meeting earlier. He wasn't just putting on a show, he genuinely couldn't understand. Why am I being criticized so harshly? I started Tencent wanting to create good products for everyone. How did it come to this? His original intention was good. This reflection was extremely important for Tencent. In the short term, Tencent looked terrible, but in the long term, it marked the beginning of Tencent's openness. Xiaobo Wu even wrote in the Tencent biography that it, in a sense, changed Pony Ma's personality. He began to rethink Tencent's platform strategy and its public nature. You can understand that before this, as we saw with Pony Ma's demeanor earlier, he was essentially a programmer or an engineer. He thought analytically and quantitatively about what the company needed to do to grow. He wouldn't engage in much qualitative observation or consider things like, now that Tencent is so big, what social responsibilities do I have? What public attributes should I possess? He didn't used to think about these things. He lacked much empathy or perspective taking. Now, it started to hurt. We enter the 4th chapter. Openness for change, overcoming adversity. Pony Ma did several things after this incident. First, on the evening of the 11th of November 2010, which was Tencent's birthday, he sent an internal email to all employees. It stated that in the past, they always thought about what was right, but now they needed to think more about what could be recognized and accepted. Then he sent another long letter titled Opening the Door to the Future. This letter contained many reflections, and the most important sentence was at the end. We will more actively promote platform openness and focus on the harmony of the industrial chain, because Tencent's dream is not to become the strongest and largest company, but rather the most respected company. The second thing was in late 2010, Pony Ma was invited to attend the 9th China Enterprise Leaders Annual Conference, where he delivered a speech titled 8 Theses on the Future of the Internet. In this speech, he dedicated a significant portion to discussing the need for transformation towards openness and how this transformation required actively listening to advice, counsel, and criticism from all sectors of society. Third, this is a well-known event in the internet industry. After the Spring Festival in 2011, Tencent organized 10 expert forums in cities like Beijing, Sanya, and Hangzhou, all themed Diagnosing Tencent. A total of 72 internet experts participated. The topics discussed were very direct. For example, Bofan Wu, who participated at the time, asked if Tencent's mindset was imperialistic and if their practices were those of an empire. Someone else directly asked, is Tencent a copycat company? Shouldn't you reflect on that? Others even dug up Tencent's early training PPTs for their product managers, saying, look, your PPTs emphasize seizing the success of others' products. Isn't that just copying? Is this how you train? And so on. The discussions were very blunt. Internally, Tencent began to reflect based on these suggestions. Fourth, on the 15th of June 2011, Tencent held its first partner conference in Beijing, attended by thousands. The message was clear. We are going to cooperate with third parties. It's no longer about me crushing you if you do well. It's about us collaborating if you do well. Tencent actually implemented this quite thoroughly afterward, and you can see significant changes. After this, you'll notice Tencent's approach shifted more towards acquisitions, investments, and partnerships. You rarely saw them trying to do everything themselves, like before, where if you did well, they'd just copy you and crush you. Incidents like what happened with our game largely stopped occurring. Tencent still faced criticism later on, and as a large company, it always had negative press. However, negative portrayals like being a public enemy, where people would avoid you because Tencent would copy your ideas, rarely reappeared. Instead, the criticism was more about things like excessive in-game purchases in their games, which generated more controversy. So, in the long run, this wasn't necessarily a bad thing for Tencent. At this point in time, Tencent looked back and realized the problems it was facing. It was no longer about how to make others believe it wasn't an empire. Rather, the foundations of its own empire were becoming unstable. Look at the timeline. This incident happened in late 2010. Let's recall that 2011, as we mentioned when discussing Sina, was a pivotal year for mobile internet. In that year, Sina Weibo had already taken shape and become the most important mobile internet product. The previous generation of BAT, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent were all trembling. Robin Li, however, wasn't trembling. He thought mobile wasn't going to work. Other companies were worried. And from the perspective of that time, I realized this after reading many media interviews and reports from back then. People believed Sina Weibo could dominate the entire landscape. Because Sina Weibo's communication features and its semi-public, semi-social attributes were thought to be able to replace QQ. Unlike now, where we see Weibo as Weibo and QQ as QQ, people then thought that using Weibo on phones, including its semi-public social media approach, could potentially eliminate QQ in the future. That was the prevailing idea. So, many media outlets felt that after Tencent's PC era passed, it might not be able to cope, and there wouldn't be as much trouble. Tencent itself was also very anxious. Tencent Weibo began internal testing in April 2010 and opened for registration in May. But as we discussed when talking about Weibo, despite the competition, Tencent Weibo didn't gain much traction. So Tencent also needed a ticket. It couldn't survive without a mobile internet ticket. But this ticket didn't originate in Shenzhen. It came from neighboring Guangzhou. Legend has it that one day in late 2010, during the 3Q war, the general manager of Tencent's Guangzhou R&D center, who was originally planning to play billiards that evening, inexplicably sent an email to Pony Ma. He asked if they could create a product similar to Cake, which was a well-known mobile internet communication tool at the time. Pony Ma replied, "Go ahead, give it a try." That's how it happened. So miraculously. This general manager then began to create what would become the most important internet ticket in China's history for Tencent. Perhaps the only one? This general manager was the heaviest smoker of Kent cigarettes late at night in Guangzhou. He was one of the most renowned programmers of the previous generation. And he was about to become one of the most famous product managers of the next generation. He was that kind of person. He was someone who, because he loved the lyrics of Blue Lotus, insisted on buying the copyright from Xu Wei to place them at the entrance of his product. He was also the type of person who, because he liked a colleague's young daughter's doodle, put that doodle along with the Blue Lotus's lyrics at the product's entrance. His name is Alan Zhang. Our story ends here for now. This will be for the next episode. So what other open initiatives did Tencent undertake later? How did Tencent directly confront Alibaba to become one of the giants in online payments? And what are the differences between Tencent's and Alibaba's entertainment ecosystems? We'll discuss all that next time. This perfectly summarizes this episode. Pony's early ventures, overcoming hardships, QQ's rise, conquering the market, public enemy, stirring up waves, openness for change, overcoming adversity. This is the main content for today. After finishing, let's briefly reminisce about QQ, as it's a collective memory for many. Just a couple more words. QQ is actually doing quite well today. Guess what its monthly active users are? 400 million. Or rather, 500 to 550 million. In many people's imagination, I might have thought breaking 100 million would be good, but it's definitely a national-level product, meaning about 1/3 of Chinese people still use it daily. Of course, it's not like the old days when it was trying to crush competitors. Now it lives in WeChat's shadow. That is to say, compared to WeChat, QQ used to be a huge force back then. It was Tencent's main lifeline. So QQ later found many differentiated paths. For example, it mainly focused on youth. It has consistently maintained a youthful focus. You'll find it very interesting. QQ's users have always been young people. It used to be the post 80S generation, then the post 90S, then the post 00s, and now it's the post 10s. It's concentrated among primary and secondary school students.
10 years ago, when our generation thought no one used QQ anymore, we first realized that kids were actually using it. Over time, that understanding deepened.
After all, WeChat has more parents and teachers, and it's relatively simple and not as fun. QQ, however, has introduced many youth-oriented features. What kind of features? For example, QQ channel is very well done. It's similar to Discord, a product not available domestically. Yes, Discord. It's a complete replica of Discord. So many communities I joined previously now use QQ to organize themselves. It's very well done, called QQ channel. It's somewhat like a semi-open community chat room. There are also videos, live streams, games, QQ Zone, and so on. These features are all very rich and lively. When recalling QQ, the first thing that comes to mind are the early QQ avatars, because the earliest QQ avatars couldn't be updated, so there were only a limited number of them.
You can pick.
So, there's a complete collection of QQ avatars. If you used QQ back then, the avatars of the boys and girls you liked might be in there. In fact, even now, when I see some of those avatars, I can immediately recall who used them. It's that kind of feeling, and the avatars I used myself are also very familiar.
You can check the show notes and see. Will you find it faster if it's something you've used yourself, or if it's something related to that person you have in mind? Which one will you find quicker?
Also, many early internet phrases, terms, and memes originated on QQ. For instance, are you a boy or a girl? These were some of the earliest expressions, and they're no longer used today. The term dinosaur also emerged during that QQ era.
This term now carries a somewhat negative connotation, and it already did back then.
But yes, people were relatively accepting of jokes, including expressions like I'm dizzy or I'm falling over. Also, the phrase I am not myself was very common because people needed help with away from keyboard tasks. When you were away from keyboard and someone messaged you, you'd say, I am not myself, don't talk to me for now. Sometimes it eventually became, you're probably yourself, but you just don't want to chat, or I am not myself. And, are you there? Was also a common opening in the QQ era. It's gone in the WeChat era because WeChat is asynchronous.
But by the WeChat era, when many people were still sending them, it became a social issue. Some would complain about it, while others just didn't understand.
Yes, asynchronous communication. But originally, during the QQ era, everyone was online, so you needed to ask, are you there? To establish a connection. Then there was Martian language, which also came from the QQ era and is less common now. There were even special generators for it. Shameda subculture with unique fashion and expressions also emerged during the QQ era, where people would change their avatars and use strange expressions. Furthermore, the earliest viral spread started on QQ. If you don't share this, you're not Chinese, was a common phrase on QQ back then. There were also curse-like openings like, if you don't forward this, you'll die. There was a particularly classic one back then. Xiaolei, take a look.
This was a piece of information related to Mr. Hejiang. It showed a photo of Hejiang and claimed he was so angry he was almost in tears. It said June 30th was Hejiang's birthday, but a Korean host claimed Hejiang had no fans, or if he did, they were just silly, giggling people who wouldn't send him many well wishes. So, Hejiang made a bet with this Korean person. If this post didn't get 500,000 reposts by June 30th, Hejiang would quit hosting. If it did, the Korean host would have to apologize. The contract was already signed. Teacher, he has been a host on Happy Camp for 14 years, bringing countless joy and laughter to the audience. It then omitted a part. It said, it's not for anything else, just to stand up for Chinese people. If you're Chinese, support this. We can't lose to those Koreans. Oh my goodness.
This was one of the earliest reposts that played on patriotic sentiment, but the angle it took was really bizarre.
This kind of repost also reminded me of many similar contexts from the student era.
Yes, it was a lot of fun. That was very popular back then. There are also some common memories, like chat box shaking. When I was researching this, I suddenly remembered that this was used quite a lot back then. The other person would send a chat box shaking, and it would suddenly pop up. No, not pop up. Your chat box would shake. Wasn't it forced to pop up and shake? No, it would pop up and shake, but it was the chat box.
Yes, it would shake. Right?
It was to show excitement. That's also very interesting to think about. And then there was step on QQ zone. As I just mentioned, you'd step on someone's and they'd step back on yours. Grabbing parking spots, steal food, moving cars. I also found some people's memories of QQ chat scenarios. For example, one netizen said, logging into QQ and looking at the avatars of a few ex-girlfriends, I can no longer find the recklessness and impulsiveness of those years. It's like watching Stephen Chow's movies from back then. I've gone from laughing heartily at the characters to becoming a tear-faced character in the play myself. I've become someone who understands the foolishness of those words.
I can understand it now.
I understand. Another netizen said, I miss the era of using QQ for the first time. Invisible, online, was the happiest and proudest moment of the day. Thank you, QQ, for the excitement and anticipation it brought. Dee. Such a familiar sound, just like you, waiting to come online. You're online. That imitation was pretty good. And there's a friend, a netizen named Lahuan Girl. The most memorable chat she had was, she said, you and I, let's go play. If you don't like me, you'll fall into a trap. Who's left then? The one I like, right? Then let's be together.
Oh, that's so cheesy, but so cute.
This netizen said, now he's my husband. Oh, and also, like what Xiaolei mentioned earlier, back then it was popular to raise 2 son accounts for your child to pass down. I also found that a few years ago was the 20th anniversary, and some netizens recalled the past, and I'm quoting some of them. For example, a netizen named Firefly said, in my first year of high school, I liked a boy in my class. He was good at drawing and very handsome. I always called him my idol. Every night after school, I would log into QQ on my computer, doing homework while chatting with him. I'd write a bit of homework, then look at the computer a bit. This went on for 5 months of ambiguity. Finally, one day, I mustered up the courage, looking at his QQ ID on the computer, and asked him on QQ, do you want to be together? A moment later, he said yes. In my excitement, I blurted out, husband. Unexpectedly, he stopped replying. Later, when we met, I found out his parents had seen that husband message. After he had several talks, we broke up in less than 2 weeks. This kind of forced pressure was a common scenario in high school back then. Netizen Phoebe said, my boyfriend and I met in our senior year of university and stayed in a long-distance relationship until we graduated from grad school. QQ was our essential daily software. We used couple avatars, wrote little love notes in QQ Zone, and updated our QQ signatures simultaneously. We often did all these typical couple things. But I especially loved the sense of companionship QQ gave me, as if he was always by my side. We both loved watching football. During the 2006 World Cup, we each watched the live broadcast online and discussed it synchronously on QQ. That month, we changed our QQ pet names. His was called Figo, and mine was Buffon. That year, C. Ronaldo and Messi were just emerging newcomers, but now they're both over 30 and considering retirement. I still remember when the referee blew the final whistle at the France vs. Italy final. A message from him popped up on QQ at the same time. Congratulations on Italy's victory. Looking back now, it was truly a beautiful midsummer night. Netizen James said, in 2003, I was still in junior high. I first learned there was software that let you chat with friends online. I couldn't wait to show off to my classmates like I'd gotten a super cool toy and had to make everyone envious. On QQ, you could add strangers to chat with. No one knew each other, which allowed you to shed real-life constraints the most. So, people on QQ usually showed their most authentic selves, or the selves they most wanted to be. I truly became dependent on QQ after I went to university. We got our own laptops and studying became less strict. Chatting and playing games in the dorm became the norm. So, when I saw a pretty girl and felt a secret crush, I'd update my QQ Zone status. For example, in the season of blooming flowers, I met you, warming all 4 seasons of blossoms. What I want is an eternity you can't promise.
The wind blows petals like shattered years, and your swaying smile becomes the most beautiful embellishment on my life's journey.
There was a lot of cringy stuff back then. Just blurting things out. Seeing the girl I liked walking by with another guy, a pang of sadness would hit me. My QQ status would change to something like, who dares to be as wild as youth, to make love last forever? Without you, my world is black and white, isolated with countless dependencies. But unfortunately, I never had a girlfriend on QQ during my 4 years of university, just occasional unrequited crushes. Luckily, QQ held my most authentic teenage years. Later, after my wife saw my QQ photo album, she said, you're much better now.
Speaking of that, QQ photo albums really were something. Because with renren.com accounts, not to mention renren.com doesn't even exist anymore, even when it did, I'd already forgotten my password, so a lot of the photos there are gone. But those photos I uploaded to QQ Zone back then, for me, the original photos themselves are long gone. Back then, you had to use a digital camera. Your computer, your hard drive, you might have replaced them over and over again. I've changed computers many times, so those photos are lost. But QQ Zone was like one of the earliest online cloud drives. It helped you save all those things.
Finally, let me share a story from netizen Xiao Chai. She said there was a game in QQ Zone called QQ Baby, recommended by her ex-boyfriend, which she played for many years. It was essentially a web-based pet-raising game where you adopted a virtual pet and earned virtual item rewards by interacting with it daily or with friends. At the time, I was ranked first among all my friends. I won every trophy available. My pet's bedroom, living room, bathroom, all the decorations were built up with countless hours of effort and money. Back then, I designed everything based on my vision for a real future home. After I collected all the trophies, I neatly arranged them in the living room to show off, visible to every friend who visited. My pet later got a boyfriend, who was my then-boyfriend's QQ baby. Even though we broke up later, the QQ baby couple status was never dissolved until the game ceased operations in April 2016. QQ truly isn't just a piece of software, it's a unique memory for a generation. Will such a product appear again in the future? I don't think so. The emergence and development of QQ coincided with the internet's penetration into several generations and our curiosity about the internet. Now, many hit apps appear, but people's freshness period is greatly reduced. I also don't have the energy to spend several years recording real emotions on one app because everyone only has one youth. Not just that, I think what he said at the end is very important. Even if today's young people have their youth, the apps they use are very different from the QQ we used back then. For example, the feeling of using Xiaoyuzhou or WeChat now is quite different from our experience back then. There are also many more options. People are less willing to invest so much, like raising a pet for several years. That's a big difference. Also, the excitement of chatting with strangers online for the first time back then was very special. I remember in junior high, being able to quickly chat with a stranger online. The feeling of transcending space was magical.
Before, you could only do this by finding pen pals and writing letters.
So, let's go back to our original question. When was the last time you opened QQ? I heard a saying that it's probably when you need to send a mass message, and that message is, I'm not logging into QQ anymore, add me on WeChat to chat.
Many people might have gone through this period, but they might not remember it very clearly.
Yes, we've probably all had that period. Some friends wanted to transfer from QQ to WeChat.
If you hadn't started by asking me that question, I wouldn't have realized that I used it just 2 days ago to look for an old acquaintance. Some people are just permanently stuck in your QQ friends list. They never migrated to WeChat. It might be very difficult to find them again later. You just can't. It's such an important memory for everyone. And I think where we're stopping today is just right. Let's not contaminate these past memories with what comes next. Not that it's contamination, but rather, let's not let the two influence each other. Starting with WeChat, it really ushered in a whole new era, both from a macroscopic societal perspective and from an individual one. On one hand, we reminisce. On the other, we prepare and look forward to the next episode.
That's all for today. All right, Caffè Breve, episode 169, that's a wrap. See you next time.
You can subscribe and listen to Caffè Breve on Xiaoyuzhou. We also welcome you to share and forward our episodes. I'm this episode's producer, Nai Shu. See you next time.